Chapter 217. Changdao, which had been quiet for many days, finally started to be chaotic. The chaos lasted from night to day. After days of depression, the city, which was now a battlefield, finally started to be noisy. An investigation that was thought to be very common. An encirclement and suppression that was thought to be easy. The running and fighting that lasted for a night directly broke the stalemate that had been in Changdao for many days. Zhou State, East Island, and the other superpowers in Changdao never thought that in the late night of the third day and the early morning of the fourth day, the approaching final battle would directly open the curtains. The sleepless night ushered in the sun, but inside the battlefield of Changdao, a storm was brewing. Teams of elites from Zhou State left the club one after another. Thousands of people from Zhou State almost filled the 3 defense zones overnight. Search. East Island reacted almost immediately. The troops that were still on the road sped up their gathering speed, and the elites of the special warfare system also came out from their hiding places in batches. Chase. In the general trend, experts of the invincible realm were like non-entities. But similarly, in the general trend, the 2 opposing sides or even many parties had important figures that they had to protect or kill. For example, Wang Xingxiao of the Wang family of Beihai. For example, Gu Hanshan, the young master of Kunlun City. Another example was Li Tianlan, the young master of Sai City. In the eyes of real experts, they were the future heavenly sons, the future figures of the invincible realm. But from another perspective, the future figures of the invincible realm meant that they were nothing now. After all, they were still too young. They needed killing and experience, and they needed to grow in blood and fire. In the final battle driven by the general trend, they were at most an opportunity, a very important opportunity. The combat capability of the 3 of them was not the top now, but any one of them had the value of changing or even reversing the general trend. Wang Xingxiao was the future patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, and probably the future number 1 on the divine list. If something happened to him, the Wang family of Beihai would not ignore it. Kunlun City had only risen in Zhou State for about 20 years. Gu Hanshan, who had the heavenly king heart, was one of the most important figures for them to stabilize their power. He was also enough to change the position of Kunlun City. Li Tianlan was backed by Sai City and Samsara Palace. If Li Tianlan fell into the hands of East Island, these 2 superpowers, at least Samsara Palace, would definitely be threatened by East Island. In this final battle, these 3 people must be protected by Zhou State, and they must be fought for by East Island. As long as any one of them was captured alive, they could reverse a considerable part of the passive situation. Li Tianlan's appearance made everyone see an important opportunity. No one expected such a figure to appear in an ordinary investigation before the final battle. The moment his trace was confirmed, the news about him was almost immediately passed to Shinichi Miyamoto, the leader of the Divine Wind Force. Then came the encirclement. For the first time, Changdao, which had been peaceful for many days, had fights, conflicts, and chaos. East Island was chasing. Zhou State was rescuing them. In just one night, the 2 sides had fought more than a dozen times in different areas. But whether they should take advantage of this opportunity and directly fight to the death when the final battle began, neither Zhou State nor East Island had made up their minds. However, the slaughter had already broken out. How could it be easy for them to live in harmony? He was in a dilemma. For the first time, Shinichi Miyamoto began to feel troubled. If he was given one more day, he would be able to fully prepare everything and then launch the final battle. At that time, on the land of Changdao, he would not be afraid of anyone or any opponent. But just one day later, the opportunity for the final battle suddenly appeared. And this opportunity was Li Tianlan. Right now, Li Tianlan was definitely one of the most crucial figures in this final battle. All the signs showed that this young heavenly son, who appeared in Zhou State a few months ago, had attracted the interest of several superpowers. Not to mention Sai City and Samsara Palace behind him, even the attitudes of the Jiang family of South America and Knights Templars were unclear. One wanted to kill him directly and the other wanted to capture him alive. Shinichi Miyamoto didn't know what they were planning, but he was very clear that as long as he could control Li Tianlan, it would definitely be good for East Island's current passive situation. If it was Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan who showed up this time, Shinichi Miyamoto could grit his teeth and suppress his impulse. But Li Tianlan's appearance made him hesitate. It was such a rare opportunity, it would be a pity not to make a move. But if he made a move, he was not well prepared now. Although he only had 1 day, the entire Battle of Changdao would last only 7 days. When the final battle started, all the superpowers of the Dark World would get involved. 1 day was enough to bring too many variables. The sun shone on every corner of the mountain, and the hot light shone on the low hillside. The military tents gradually reflected the dazzling light. Shinichi Miyamoto stood in front of his tent, watching the darkness turn into light in his sight. He was motionless like a statue. This was the temporary headquarters of the final battle in East Island. They didn't station themselves in some places with people. Instead, they chose a low hill with few people and pitched tents one after another on the hill. In this final battle of East Island, 80% of the most powerful elites were here. And Shinichi Miyamoto, the palace master of Liuhua Palace and the leader of the Divine Wind Force, the only superior of the invincible realm in East Island, had also been here since the first day. The final battle was approaching and Shinichi Miyamoto's state of mind was getting calmer and calmer. But Li Tianlan's news disturbed his mind. He had been standing here all night, but the hesitation in his heart was still surging. What do you think? Under the sun, Shinichi Miyamoto, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly opened his mouth. He was dressed in a gray ninja costume and even his face was covered. He was like a shadow in the daytime, vague and illusory. Li Tianlan must be controlled by us. This is an absolutely good opportunity and it's fleeting. Your Highness, we can't hesitate. Tianyu, the high priest of Ayase Grand Shrine, made his position clear immediately. He was seriously injured in the battle against Li Baiyan, Dongqing Rushi and others in the capital city, and he hadn't fully recovered yet. But right now his tone was firm, even resolute. This person is indeed very important in this battle. It's not only about the internal affairs of Zhongzhou state, but also about the Samsara Palace. He's a key figure and we should take the initiative. Heavenly Hound, the left advisor of Wuji Palace, said in a deep voice. The people present, especially those who could stand in front of Shinichi Miyamoto, were all important figures in the special warfare system of East Island, including the top management of the Divine Wind Force, the giants of the Shinto sect, the left and right advisors of Wuji Palace, and the key figures of Liuhua Palace and Jifeng Sword Training School. In the upcoming final battle, each of them was the most crucial combat capability. If they had the same attitude toward the final battle, their will would even be stronger than Shinichi Miyamoto's own will. What are you worried about, Your Highness? Tide and Glacier asked at the same time. These two superiors of the half-step invincible realm were the left and right guards of the Mikado, and their status was very high. Their questions seemed to represent their position. I'm worried that this is a bait set by Zhongzhou state. Shinichi Miyamoto took a deep breath and said in a low voice, It's such a coincidence that Li Tianlan exposed himself this time. It's an opportunity, but it could also be a trap. Glacier and Tide looked at each other and spoke again at the same time. They said flatly, This is East Island. Shinichi Miyamoto smiled bitterly. This was indeed East Island, but now it was the conflict of the Dark World. A large number of elites of East Island were trapped in Huating Zhongzhou state. Now their strength was limited and they couldn't use the troops on the periphery. So what if this was East Island? I support the final battle. A clear voice sounded. This is our country. Since we have such a good opportunity, why don't we fight? We're not ready and the others aren't either. Anyway, we have the advantage. Shinichi Miyamoto narrowed his eyes, but he remained calm. It was Crown Prince Ren who spoke. Glacier and Tide, the two superiors from the royal family, had already expressed their stance, so there was no need to ask Crown Prince Ren's position. He forced himself to calm down and suddenly said, Sorry, I need to make a phone call. Under everyone's confused gaze, he walked aside and dialed a number. It wasn't the Mikado or the Prime Minister, but someone outside East Island. Your Highness Miyamoto? On the other side of the phone, a lazy voice sounded with a hint of a smile. What can I do for you? Li Tianlan. Shinichi Miyamoto didn't waste any time and said in a deep voice, He's here. Evil, why don't you make a move? On the phone, the only killer of the invincible realm in the Dark World fell silent. After a long time he said flatly, Believe it or not, I have to say that I've observed Li Tianlan. I'm only a few hundred meters away from him and he's alone. But I always feel that he's dangerous. At least I don't have the confidence to kill him now. So I need a chance. Dangerous. Shinichi Miyamoto raised his eyebrows in surprise. Yes, it's dangerous. Evil's tone was solemn, but there was a hint of doubt in it. Shinichi Miyamoto didn't say anything more and hung up the phone without any expression. He stood where he was, and after a long silence he suddenly turned around and said, "Give the order." The superior of East Island, who was waiting for Shinichi Miyamoto's final decision, suddenly trembled. "Catch Li Tianlan at all costs." Shinichi Miyamoto said word by word, "Even if it's the final battle." He finally agreed with Crown Prince Ren's judgment. 7 days was too short after all. Even if Li Tianlan was the bait and East Island wasn't well prepared, Xianxia State wouldn't be well prepared either. In the final battle now they still had the advantage. But what Shinichi Miyamoto didn't know was that Xianxia State wasn't well prepared, but Li Tianlan, the bait, wasn't thrown out by Xianxia State. If it weren't for a mysterious man's unexpected disruption, Li Tianlan's investigation wouldn't have been exposed. In the final battle now, all the forces exposed to East Island weren't well prepared. But there was a mysterious force that had been waiting for a long time. In the midst of the known and unknown, all the forces of East Island started to take action. The final battle officially broke out. At the same time, in the cold downtown area of Chongdao, in front of a suite of a hotel, a man in white clothes and pants pried open the door in front of him. The door was pulled open from the inside, and what appeared in front of the man in white was like a mirror. Inside the room, there were 2 men with similar appearances and similar temperaments, both dressed in snow-white clothes, standing face to face. They were like mirror images of each other. The man inside the door had a fleeting expression, and his eyes were complicated and confused. The man outside the door was silent, and his eyes were complicated and sad. Daybreak. Did things go well? After a short silence, Daybreak, who was standing in the room, took the initiative to speak, and his voice was a little hoarse. "Very well." Dawn nodded. "More smoothly than I expected. I just killed a superior of the thundershocking realm in front of them and they were exposed. The Big Dipper led people to chase me in person, huh? Your expression seems a little strange." Daybreak was silent for a while, and then he moved aside to let Dawn in. He said slowly, "What happened?" Dawn's facial muscles twitched. He opened his mouth but didn't speak for a while. "What the hell happened?" Daybreak raised his eyebrows and his handsome, almost devilish face suddenly looked a little sharp. Tianji is dead." Dawn said in a hoarse voice. "He died with the Big Dipper. I saw it with my own eyes." Daybreak's pupils contracted instantly. He raised his hand and slapped Dawn's face hard. "Why didn't you save him?" Daybreak growled, and there was undisguised pain in his eyes. His devilish face suddenly became ferocious. "If I saved him, I would be exposed. I was sure to defeat the Big Dipper, but I wasn't sure to get out unscathed." Dawn lowered his head and said in a low and dispirited tone, "Brother, His Highness will arrive in Chongdao in 3 hours." Daybreak gritted his teeth. After a long while, he sighed helplessly and murmured, "What does His Highness want to do?" Dawn smiled bitterly and didn't speak. The phone suddenly rang. Daybreak took out his phone, looked at the number, and immediately answered. He said in a low voice, "Your Highness. His Highness has gone to Ninghu. He asked me to tell you to go to Ninghu and meet him after you deal with things in Chongdao." On the phone, a cold female voice with endless killing intent rang out. "Phoenix." Daybreak shouted in surprise and then frowned. His Highness went to Ninghu? Why did he go to Ninghu at this time? The young master was killed. On the phone, the woman with the code name Phoenix said coldly and then hung up. It was a simple sentence, but it sounded like thunder in Daybreak's ears. It was earth-shattering. Chapter 218. A high-powered off-road vehicle rushed from Chongdao to Ninghu at a violent speed. The bright sunshine of Chongdao fell far behind the vehicle. It was raining in Ninghu at this time. It was daytime, but the sky was completely covered by gloomy dark clouds. The raindrops kept hitting the car window pitter-patter, and there was a hazy mist on the car window. The windshield wipers kept working. The off-road vehicle didn't slow down at all in the rain. It roared into the downtown area of Ninghu and drove to the suburbs of Ninghu. The roar of the off-road vehicle's engine seemed to be abnormal, but the driver didn't care. The vehicle roared past Ninghu's Wuxia mountain and rushed into a nearby fishing village as if it was taking off from the ground. The village was very small, with a population of 200 or 300, and the permanent population was no more than 100. It was quiet at this time. The off-road vehicle stopped in the middle of the village and the door opened. In just a few hours, Daybreak and Dawn, who arrived in Ninghu at the fastest speed, didn't stop. Like two white shadows, they flashed and rushed directly to the north of the village. The narrow alley in the north of the village was almost full of fishermen, men and women, old and young. The more mature ones more or less had a trace of regret or sadness on their faces. The crowd talked in twos and threes. Under the gloomy sky, the small fishing village near the sea looked more depressing. Daybreak and Dawn's hearts sank to the bottom. Although they had received the news in advance, they couldn't help but feel cold when they saw it with their own eyes. The villagers' discussion was buzzing, clear and vague. Their minds were blank and they walked past the villagers around them in a daze like walking corpses. Huawu is dead. Yeah, what a pity. I haven't seen him for a few days. It turns out, the murderer went too far. He's so cruel. He's a good kid. The last time I saw him he wanted me to take him fishing. Yeah, he's a kind kid. He often came to help me with things and tutored my son. What a pity. It's too much. Who killed him? Poor little Kudo. Daybreak and Dawn walked forward in a daze, lost. Come in. A clear, flat and emotionless voice suddenly rang out beside the two of them. The voice was very soft, but it struck their hearts in an instant. Daybreak and Dawn were shocked. They looked at each other and saw the despair in each other's eyes. They knew that the young master had been killed. Although this was definitely bad news, the two of them still had some hope in their hearts. But now, their hope was completely shattered with a simple word from His Highness. If there really was hope, His Highness wouldn't be here at this moment. This could only mean that there was no turning back. The two pushed through the crowd in front of them and strode into the courtyard. There were very few people in the courtyard. A few men and women dressed like ordinary fishermen but with different temperaments were kneeling in the corner of the courtyard. Their faces were ashen and they were motionless as if they had lost their souls. A middle-aged man who looked to be in his 40s or 50s was standing in the middle of the yard calmly. He had a thin, ordinary body and an unremarkable appearance. He stood there expressionlessly with his back to Dawn and Daybreak. He was calm but exuded an indescribable sense of oppression and danger. It was an indescribable feeling. The whole yard, the whole fishing village and even the whole world became illusory around the man. The tall and cold woman standing beside the man, and even Daybreak and Dawn themselves became meaningless background. Only the seemingly ordinary man existed with the most real feeling. He was motionless, but once he moved, it seemed that the whole world around him would be broken into ashes with his outburst. Behind this dazed and oppressive environment, both Daybreak and Dawn felt an extreme rage and killing intent. Your Highness. Daybreak and Dawn stood behind the man and bowed, trying their best to keep calm. The man said nothing and didn't move like a statue. Dawn subconsciously looked at the woman standing beside the man. It was a woman in her 30s. She was elegant, delicate, arrogant, and mature. She was a very attractive woman like a thorny rose, delicate and beautiful but also very dangerous. However, at this moment, standing next to the man, her elegance dimmed like never before. At this moment she was like a lifeless sculpture and only the man beside her was the most real person. Her code name was Phoenix. In their organization she was a master whose position was no less than Daybreak and Daybreak's. Phoenix seemed to feel Dawn's gaze but she didn't dare to move. She just turned the corner of her eyes and signaled them to look forward. Daybreak and Dawn moved to the left and right respectively. They looked past the man in front of them and their faces suddenly changed. A small piece of white cloth was spread out in front of the man. The white cloth was stained with dried and somewhat black blood. A palm that seemed to be maintaining a hand seal was placed on the white cloth. Other than that, there was only a pile of ashes mixed with gravel as well as some minced meat and broken bones. This was their young master. Daybreak and Dawn's eyes became extremely cold in an instant. Intense anger and killing intent burst out from them in an instant. Smashing bones and scattering ashes. They thought of this word immediately, but their eyes fell on the palm that was still making a seal. What did he want to express by leaving this palm? Was it a provocation? Daybreak's body slightly trembled uncontrollably. He suddenly reached out his hand, and a middle-aged man who was kneeling in the corner flew over uncontrollably and was caught by Daybreak. What's going on? Daybreak's voice was as cold as the chilly wind blowing in the hell. I don't know. The morning before yesterday, young master was killed on his way to school and didn't come back that day. We searched for a long time before we found young master's remains under the cliff of Wuxia mountain. The man caught by Daybreak was an expert who was infinitely close to the thunder-shocking realm. He was also one of the hidden pawns they left in the village to accompany young master. But at this time this person's face was completely pale, and there was only despair in his eyes. It was self-evident what young master meant to their organization. He was the son of His Highness, a real genius. Although he didn't have fancy things like wind and thunder veins and heavenly king heart and exquisite bone, his real combat capability was unparalleled. As a 10-year-old thunder-shocking realm expert, as long as he was given time, he would definitely enter the invincible realm as soon as he was 30 years old. He was the real heavenly son, destined to sweep the dark world in the future. But now, such a person who was regarded as the biggest hope by His Highness and the entire organization was killed. As guardians, they couldn't absolve themselves from the blame. Who did it? Standing in front of his son's remains, the mysterious Highness finally spoke. His voice was still calm without any extra emotion. The extreme calmness was in itself a kind of complete madness. There was silence. No one could answer this question. After a long time, Daybreak smiled bitterly and said, "Now we can't even find the suspect. Maybe it's the dark forces that entered Changdao recently, and Zhongzhou State." The expert who was grabbed by breaking dawn said with a fierce gaze. Daybreak glanced at him coldly and didn't even bother to say a word. Young master had been secretly taught by His Highness since he was a child. After he was left to live in this mountain village, Daybreak, Dawn, Phoenix, and the others would come to give him advice from time to time. No one knew more than them how terrifying young master was. A 17-year-old thunder-shocking realm expert represented not only the terrifying and desperate potential in the future, but also the extremely violent combat capability. Many people thought that Daybreak was the strongest expert in the organization except for His Highness. It might not be wrong, but Daybreak was sure that if he fought desperately he might be able to seriously injure young master, but he would be the one who would die in the end. Even if he and Dawn joined hands, young master couldn't defeat him and wanted to run away, and they couldn't stop him. In other words, in the entire dark world, no one under the invincible realm could kill young master. Under such circumstances, young master was turned into ashes. Which invincible realm expert did it? Even if Shinichi Miyamoto did it himself, he couldn't kill young master without making a sound. The mysterious Highness squatted down slowly. He picked up his son's palm, which was still in the gesture of making a handprint. His eyes were complicated and sad. He put the palm in front of his mouth and kissed it. Then he said blandly, "Investigate. Investigate any expert who entered Ninghu in the past week, including those above the fire-flaming realm. Phoenix, you do this. You don't have to go to Changdao anymore." Phoenix froze, then nodded and said, "Yes." The man stayed silent for a long time, then carefully put away all the ashes, broken bones and minced flesh on the gravel. His expression was calm, but his fingertips were shaking uncontrollably. Turned into ashes. In the broken bones and minced flesh he felt heartache, and he also felt the murderer's extreme resentment and hatred towards him and all of them. Who on earth had such a deep hatred towards him? And how could the murderer be so resourceful as to find his son? The man's movements were very slow. He slowly collected all the remains into a jar. He held the jar for a long time before sighing softly and muttering to himself, "I've endured for so many years, but what have I gotten in return?" Daybreak and Dawn's facial muscles twitched at the same time. The death of young master was more than just a simple matter of His Highness sending off his son. The plan of their whole organization for so many years completely failed with this murder. It was hard for people who weren't in the game to understand how cruel this move was. "I'll ask Dawn to send you home." The man stroked the jar in his hand and finally gave the urn to Dawn. He said blandly, "After things in Changdao are over, you will send Huawu home in person." Kudu. Kudu was a fake, of course. But Huawu was his real name. Dawn took the jar with trembling hands, but he couldn't stop his tears from flowing. He knew what it meant to go home. His real home, of course, wasn't in East Island. But if it wasn't in East Island, where could it be? "Yes." Dawn answered in a hoarse voice, and his voice was as shrill as a ghost's. "Let's change the plan of Changdao." The man closed his eyes and opened them after a long time. his tone had become cold and flat again. Originally. He paused, shook his head in self-mockery and continued, protect Li Tianlan with all your strength at all costs. Yes. Daybreak and dawn said at the same time. The man slowly walked out of the courtyard. There were still a lot of villagers wandering outside the courtyard. Seeing the man come out and he didn't do anything, all the villagers involuntarily made way for him. The man walked calmly, but his steps were slow and heavy. The whole village seemed to be trembling under his footsteps. Who do you think it is? He walked slowly and suddenly asked. I don't know. Daybreak shook his head. The identity of the young master was a secret even in the organization. Under normal circumstances, no matter how advanced the murderer's intelligence system was, he shouldn't have found this place. But their intelligence collection is obviously immature. Dawn held the jar and said slowly, although they found the young master, they didn't find... Shut up. Before he could finish his words, Daybreak had already interrupted him severely with a stern look in his eyes. The man in front of him didn't say a word, walked through the alley very slowly and walked out of the village in the rain. Crack, woo-woo, behind him the shrill sound of thunder suddenly rang out the moment the man stepped out of the village. The loud sound appeared and disappeared in an instant. Above the village, the air within a radius of hundreds of meters suddenly twisted violently. In the twisted air, the clouds above seemed to be torn apart in a trance. The air kept squeezing and shaking, becoming fragmented. The fragmented space kept reflecting light, and the light became colorful in the messy reflection. The man had walked out of the village. As he stepped down, the extremely fragmented and twisted space suddenly shone brightly. There seemed to be a rainbow in the village, going straight into the sky from the entrance of the village. The light was gorgeous and cold. In silence, the whole village was twisted and broken. All the buildings and all the villagers were flattened and dissipated in the incredible power. The rain was falling. The man kept walking. From the beginning to the end, no matter he, dawn, daybreak or phoenix, none of them looked back. Chapter 219. In less than 24 hours, the whole of Changdao went from being extremely quiet to extremely active, and it directly became a whirlpool that could swallow everything. The general trend was booming. All the superpowers participated in it, either actively or passively. The battlefield of Changdao was stained with blood, and the killing didn't stop. On the huge battlefield with a radius of 100 miles, the elites of the dark superpowers encountered each other intentionally or unintentionally, and then they attacked each other without hesitation. This was a war without a target, or in other words, the target was too big. After all, East Island was small, but it was powerful. At least in Asia, it might not be as powerful as Zhou State, but it was far more powerful than other countries. It was world-class in many fields, especially in the dark world. The warrior spirit that East Island advocated made it particularly powerful in the dark world. In such a small place, there were 3 superiors of the invincible realm. Counting the 2 superiors of Night Spirit who had died, there were 5 superiors of the invincible realm. This alone showed how powerful the special warfare system of East Island was. And this time, the ultimate goal of all the superpowers was the right to speak of the special warfare system of East Island. This was a power that couldn't be shared. So they had to force East Island to compromise, but they were also mortal enemies with each other. No one was willing to give up the interests of the special warfare system of a country. So from the beginning of the Battle of Changdao, this place was destined to be a bloodbath, and it would become the biggest meat grinder in the dark world in recent years. Any superpower that was qualified to participate in the game couldn't get out unscathed. This was a battle of life and death. But before the final battle, at least for the dark superpowers, they barely had a common enemy. So when the final battle broke out, it was reasonable for the superpowers to split up and join forces in the battle. When the morning sun crossed the sky and the scorching sun was about to fall in the west, in the residential area on the edge of the battlefield of Changdao that was about to be demolished, the leaders of the dark superpowers in East Island gathered together again. It was still the same dilapidated hall. The dirty curtains covered the red setting sun outside the window and the room was dark. A few ghost-like shadows stood quietly in every corner as if they had never moved. The LCD screen that occupied an entire wall had been turned on, and one image after another was flashing on the screen. Dazzling light emitted from the screen, illuminating the faces of several people in the room. The person closest to the screen was still the first vice president of the Heroes Club, Ben. He held a small and delicate remote control in his hand and froze the flickering picture on the screen. The image froze for a moment, then continued to play. Although the image was no longer flashing, it was still moving. On the screen, a group of white people dressed in different clothes were fighting fiercely. Both sides of the battle wore different emblems on their chests and sleeves, proving that they belonged to two different forces. A live broadcast. Ben's skeleton-like thin figure moved. He whistled, and an old and gloomy voice came from the black robe that wrapped around his body. He laughed grimly and said, "The lads of the Polar Ground Alliance and the Holy Sanctum are too energetic. Oh, another one has fallen. Ah, another one. Wonderful, truly wonderful." Two cold snorts sounded at the same time. In the dark environment not far behind Ben, a figure that was as strong as a giant moved, and the awe-inspiring murderous aura condensed and spread, but it wasn't aimed at Ben but at another figure in the dark. In the dark there was a dazzling, almost holy white figure with blonde hair and white clothes. Even in the dark, there was a kind of dignity and purity that couldn't be profaned. "Holy light, control your bastards. Don't think that you're invincible just because someone is standing up for the holy sanctum. No matter how strong the master behind you is, he can't radiate his power to Changdao." In the dark, the voice of the strong figure that was full of great power was cold and thick, with undisguised murderous intent and threat. "Heh, Holy Light," the vice-commander of the Knights Templars chuckled and said coldly, "the Holy Sanctum doesn't need other people to stand up for us against the Polar Ground Alliance. King Bear, do you want to fight with me? Sooner or later." King Bear laughed grimly, "Right in Changdao, I'll tear you apart myself. You two, you're not enemies." Ben suddenly spoke, his voice getting older and hoarser, with an indescribable mystery. "At least not now. We now have two most important targets. The first is East Island and the second is Xianxia State. Compared with them, each of us is weak. If they don't die, do we need to have internal strife?" I agree with Ben's words. Now it seems that our biggest opponents are East Island and Xianxia State. After we destroy them, it's time for us to fight. King Bear, Holy Light, you need to restrain your subordinates. Crow of Fantasy World said in a gloomy tone. King Bear and Holy Light looked at each other and kept silent in the cold, murderous intent. "If you all can calm down, then I can tell you a piece of news." Li Tianlan showed up. Ben stared at the big screen in front of him and said slowly. No one said anything. Li Tianlan showed up. They weren't fools, so they naturally knew it. Wasn't it nonsense to say it now? The power of the Polar Ground Alliance in East Island isn't as strong as the Heroes Club, but we can still get this kind of news. King Bear said impatiently, "Ben, what the hell do you want to say? I know you have your own intelligence channels. But do you know where Li Tianlan showed up last time?" Ben sneered, pointed at the big screen and said in a complicated tone, "The place where Li Tianlan showed up last time is less than 2,000 meters away from here." The hall suddenly went quiet. This was indeed an unexpected news. The elites of Xianxia State were hiding in a luxury club in the middle of the battlefield, but this was already the edge of the battlefield. The elites of East Island were besieging Li Tianlan. Why didn't Li Tianlan retreat to his own base camp? Why did he come here? Who here wasn't shrewd? Even the rash and impulsive Bear King was a character who had experienced many storms in the past. A simple piece of news, but it made them clearly smell a trace of a conspiracy. Li Tianlan naturally doesn't want to come here, but his retreat has been cut off by the elites of East Island. In other words, now he is farther and farther away from the people of Xianxia State but closer and closer to us. It's very interesting, isn't it? Ben smiled softly, but his voice was a little cold. Obviously our hiding place has long been exposed. East Island wants to use Li Tianlan to lead us into the trap in advance. We can intervene in the battlefield, but I hope some people can calm down. Holy Light's eyes suddenly burst out a sharp light. Among the several dark forces present, only Knights Templars and the Jiang family of South America were most interested in Li Tianlan, especially Knights Templars. They received the order from the Vatican, or in other words, they followed the will of His Majesty the Pope, so they were determined to get Li Tianlan. Now Li Tianlan seemed to be far away from them, which made Holy Light a little excited. But Ben's words made him calm down quickly. Li Tianlan was one of the key figures in the final battle. Xianxia State wanted to protect him, East Island wanted to catch him, and the Jiang family of South America and Knights Templars also wanted to take him over. But now the final battle had just begun. If they caught Li Tianlan now, it would definitely lead to the joint attack of the two strongest forces, East Island and Zhou State, and it would also destroy the tacit understanding between Knights Templars and the Jiang family of South America. Li Tianlan naturally had to be caught, but it also had to be at the right time. Now it seemed that it was still too early. I know what to do. Holy Light said blandly, I will put Li Tianlan's matter aside, but I also hope some people can restrain themselves. His eyes turned and fell on another person in the corner. That was a woman shrouded in darkness. In the absence of the third master of the Jiang family, the killer of the invincible realm in the dark world, evil, she was the representative of the Jiang family of South America. The woman in the dark chuckled and didn't say much. It's good that you can have a clear judgment. Ben turned around slowly and said softly, since the final battle has begun, of course we have to join the battle. 10 minutes ago, I decided that all the elites of the Heroes Club will enter the battlefield together. The first target is the elites of East Island, and the second is the elites of Zhou State. In the current situation, only by killing them can we qualify for the final battle. I hope that the final battle in Changdao will be between us. Before that, I hope that our alliance is unbreakable. Holy Light hesitated and nodded, saying, I agree with this plan. Agree. Crow's hoarse and unpleasant voice rang out. I have no opinion. King Bear still looked at Holy Light with an unruly face. What about the cooperation outside of Changdao? In the dark, the voice of the woman who represented the Jiang family of South America rang out lightly and charmingly. No one spoke. Everyone's eyes were on Holy Light. The cooperation outside of Changdao was naturally to plot against Zhou State. But Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong of Zhou State was still in Zhou State. If they wanted to keep the cooperation smooth, they must have the power to stop Wang Tianzong. The cooperation remains the same. Holy Light said slowly. His Highness has set off from the headquarters of the Vatican. He will arrive at the border between Zhou State and Annan State in 12 hours. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Ben smiled and said slowly, then I wish us a happy cooperation. The woman who represented the Jiang family of South America chuckled and slowly disappeared. Without a sound, Crow also disappeared in the hall. The screen on the wall gradually dimmed. The whole hall returned to the most quiet and oppressive state again. The final battle of Changdao had begun. Similarly, a storm was about to rise at the border of Zhou State. The general trend swept the dark world. After Changdao, Northern Europe and North America, the fourth battlefield was about to appear. In the gradually darkening night, a black luxury car slowly drove into Changdao from Ninghu. The night was dark. Qin Weibai, who came to Changdao quietly and then went to Ninghu and finally returned to Changdao, sat quietly in the back of the car, looking at the dim light outside the window indifferently. The dim yellow light shone on a small corner in the back of the car. Qin Weibai sat in the corner shrouded by the light, looking more and more dreamy and ethereal. Boss Tianlan's whereabouts were exposed during the investigation, and he is now being encircled. Zhou State has begun to send people to rescue him. Duke, Flaming Fire and Horsewoman are also on the move, but they haven't found Tianlan yet. In the passenger seat, Saint answered a phone call and slowly reported. Qin Weibai's delicate body seemed to tighten for a moment, and then she slowly relaxed and said, How long has it been? Nearly 20 hours. Saint's tone was still calm. Sunset Shadow tried to cover Tianlan's death. The last news we got was that Tianlan and the others had been separated and they were all on the run. Qin Weibai's delicate eyebrows slightly frowned. After a moment of silence, she slowly said, Saint, you go to Tianlan yourself. Besides, have you locked on to her position? After she separated from Tianlan, she seemed to want to run back and she seemed to be hurt. Military counselor who drove in person took the initiative to say, Let's go see her. Qin Weibai's eyes flashed with complexity and she finally said softly. Military counselor responded, and then the car fell into silence again. Aren't you going to ask me anything? In the silence, Qin Weibai broke the silence and suddenly asked. Boss, if you want to say something, you will tell us. If you don't want to say it, it doesn't matter. Saint seemed to know what Qin Weibai meant. He smiled and said, I know there must be an earth-shattering big shot behind that child. Otherwise, no matter how talented he is, he won't be so horrible. But it doesn't matter. Anyway, he is dead. We did this with the Wang family of Beihai. Even if someone comes for revenge in the future, so what? Qin Weibai looked out of the window in silence. After a long time she sighed and said, his name is Cutting Huowu. Who? Ah, he was a figure who could leave a glorious mark in the dark world, but now he is dead. What a pity. Her tone was cold and she said it was a pity, but her eyes were clear without a trace of guilt. The most infatuated person was the most ruthless. In this world, in this era, she might feel sorry for many people, but as long as she was worthy of him, that was enough. What did the life and death of others have to do with her? If she owed someone, she owed someone. Moreover, in the grand scheme of things, could it really be so clear who owed who? A long time ago she had made up her mind that in this life, even if she had to break her bones and give up everything. Chapter 220. The black limousine drove into downtown Chongdao without any disguise and passed through the battlefield. At the edge of the battlefield, a large number of East Island troops were gathering. Soldiers in all kinds of military uniforms were scattered at the edge of the battlefield, and all kinds of heavy weapons were placed in the most conspicuous places. Chongdao wasn't big, but it was still huge compared to an individual. In just a few days, East Island transferred troops from all over to Chongdao, and the number of troops around the edge of the battlefield was close to 100,000. With 100,000 people, it seemed unrealistic to surround a battlefield with a radius of 100 miles. But with all kinds of heavy firepower weapons and satellite monitoring, East Island was sure that they could hit any corner of the battlefield. The black limousine passed the checkpoint set by the East Island Army, but the guards here didn't even bother to look at it and let it go. Within 7 days, people were allowed to enter this place, but no one was allowed to leave. East Island wouldn't stop anyone who wanted to join this battlefield. The Dark World had its own rules. East Island also had its own rules. All the dark superpowers attacked East Island together, and East Island also drew a large enough battlefield, so they had to follow the rules in the place of the final battle. The 100,000 troops that East Island scattered at the edge of the battlefield could be said to be a deterrent, but more importantly, it was intercepting and protecting the outside of the battlefield from damage. The battlefield with a radius of 100 miles was big enough, and it wasn't a limit for all the superpowers. In this area, it didn't matter if they fought fiercely. No matter who won or lost in the end, the East Island Army wouldn't intervene, because this was a conflict within the scope of the Dark World. But in a big enough battlefield, if someone wanted to rush out and destroy East Island on purpose, he would be an invader, and East Island had every reason and ability to destroy any superpower. That was the rule. Today's final battle was like a vendetta in Jianghu. The authorities would pay attention to it, but they couldn't intervene. Even if East Island was wiped out in this final battle, they could only endure it. Once East Island dared to use the army to break the rule, what awaited East Island was a war. A real war. No one wanted to escalate the situation to such a serious extent. East Island didn't dare, Zhou State didn't want to, and other superpowers didn't want to either. Keeping everything within the scope of the conflict in the Dark World, and winning or losing, they could still get the benefits they wanted, but it wouldn't cause catastrophic consequences. That was what everyone wanted to see. The black limousine rushed into the demolition area at the edge of the battlefield. On the passenger seat, Saint's figure slowly disappeared. Up to now, Zhou State and Samsara had not found Li Tianlan, which could only mean that he was in the enemy-occupied area of the battlefield outside the radiation range of Zhou State. If they searched from here, the probability of finding him was relatively higher. Military counselor continued to drive. In the back of the car, Qin Weibai remained calm and collected, but her pair of snow-white slender hands were tightly clenched into fists. "Where is she?" Qin Weibai asked softly. The military advisor who was driving took out a screen and looked at it before replying, "From here? Less than 20 kilometers away. Night has locked onto her position and is following her in secret." 20 kilometers. Qin Weibai's bright eyes flickered, and her whole person exuded a kind of enchanting and holy charm. The military counselor remained silent. This distance was indeed beyond his expectation. This place was close to the edge of the battlefield, completely outside the sphere of influence of Zhou State. At first, according to Horsewoman, the other party should be fleeing back, but now it was 20 kilometers away from the edge of the battlefield. Obviously, after fleeing back for a distance, the other party turned back and went straight into the enemy-occupied area. She's looking for Tianlan. Qin Weibai suddenly sneered. She really doesn't give up. Hurry up, I want to see her right away. Military counselor answered and stepped on the accelerator. As the car accelerated, he hesitated for a moment and finally couldn't help but ask, "Do you really want to see her?" Since killing Cutting Huowu, military counselor had felt that something was wrong. Although he didn't know what exactly was going on, he had some guesses from some clues. At this time, if the boss went to see her, there might be a risk of exposure. "I have to go." Qin Weibai's voice was soft and firm. "She's like a bomb around Tianlan. I must help him dismantle it." "Kill her?" Military counselor's eyes suddenly turned cold. "You can't kill her." Qin Weibai shook her head and said no more. Military counselor didn't ask anymore, but he drove faster and faster. The car rushed out of the demolition area, and the trees on the road were moving backward quickly. The night outside the window was quiet. Qin Weibai looked at the night sky through the window and said to herself coldly, "Years of hard work just to make a wedding dress. Even if I give you a good death, so what?" Sneaking, searching, observing. The quiet night shrouded the whole dense forest. Dongqing Rushi looked calm and cautious, walking carefully in the forest. The final battle had broken out. But this place was behind the enemy, and it hadn't been covered by the fire of war yet. But the density of patrols in the whole area gradually increased. Dongqing Rushi's face was pale. She avoided the patrols of East Island and searched carefully. She never thought about going back. That night, as Sunset Shadow and the Big Dipper died together, and as Wind Ghost died, only 2 of the 7 Thundershocking Realm experts who chased them survived. They desperately rushed out of the encirclement, but in the chaos, they were completely scattered by the furious elites of East Island. Dongqing Rushi fled alone in the battlefield, trying her best to get rid of the East Island experts who were chasing her, and then began to return without hesitation. Along the way, he had been hiding not only from the elites of East Island, but also from the elites of Zhongzhou State. They were all in his hiding range. She went deep into the enemy's rear alone. Dongqing Rushi's clear eyes became more and more alert. Her whole body was tense and she was ready to attack and escape with all her strength. It was stuffy in the quiet forest. Dongqing Rushi, who was almost soaked in sweat, sat behind a big tree, exhausted. She silently ate the compressed biscuit in her hand, looking calm. In the quiet forest there was a slight sound of wind. The soft footsteps passed into Dongqing Rushi's ears with the dull wind. In an instant, Dongqing Rushi, who was tense all over, directly bounced up from the ground, turned around and stared in the direction of the footsteps. There were no stars and no moon in the sky tonight. In the dim light, a tall and slender figure walked toward her alone, casually. She was wearing white clothes and a white skirt, and she was peerless. That was a kind of unparalleled charm that could almost make all women feel ashamed of themselves. It was illusory, as if she didn't belong to the mortal world, so perfect that it was like a dream. Dongqing Rushi didn't feel the danger, but out of instinct she suddenly took a few steps back. The white figure approached her unhurriedly. In the extremely low visibility, Dongqing Rushi finally saw the other's face. Her face was perfect, delicate and sharp like that of a fairy. "I'm Qin Weibai." The white figure looked at Dongqing Rushi and said in a calm tone, "Sit." Dongqing Rushi didn't speak, nor did she sit down. The silent sword was behind her, but she held a red dagger tightly in her hand, and the faint killing intent surged in her body. At this moment, Dongqing Rushi was sure that there were only 2 people near this forest. One was herself. The other was this extraordinary woman in the dark world who didn't know martial arts. Facing the faint fluctuating killing intent, Qin Weibai didn't seem nervous at all. Her bright eyes quietly glanced at the dagger in Dongqing Rushi's hand. She chuckled, but her tone was a little complicated. "Missing and forgetting each other. It's really a story of entanglement." Dongqing Rushi's pupils suddenly contracted, and the light in her eyes changed. The pure color flickered and it seemed to fade away. "Stop pretending." Qin Weibai said indifferently, "You're not Dongqing Rushi. If you were her, you wouldn't be nervous facing me. Even if you were nervous, you wouldn't hold this acacia. Silence is her weapon, and you are her second personality? You know me well." Dongqing Rushi's eyes suddenly changed. The purity faded away and it became melancholy, indifference and coldness. "What do you want?" Dongqing Yueshan asked. For nearly 100 years in Zhongzhou State. Do you know which family is the most pitiful and pathetic? Qin Weibai didn't answer Dongqing Yueshan, but asked in a very soft tone. The soft tone seemed to come from the sky, and it lingered with a dreamy feeling like the sounds of nature. Dongqing Yueshan's eyes were in a trance, and then they became cold again. It's not the Li family. Qin Weibai answered her own question. It's the Dongqing clan. Dongqing Yueshan still didn't say a word. Do you know Dongqing Huang too? Qin Weibai asked indifferently. Dongqing Yueshan's eyes suddenly became colder. You know a lot. In the silence, Dongqing Yueshan finally opened her mouth and sneered slightly. But you shouldn't have appeared in front of me alone. I'm not Rushi, I'm Dongqing Yueshan. Boss Qin, are you warning me about something by appearing in front of me? Aren't you afraid that I'll kill you? Kill me. Qin Weibai laughed. Her laughter was cold and sweet, echoing in the forest like a fairy. What a coincidence. There was once someone who wanted to kill me. Her name was Li Yueshan. Crack. Dongqing Yueshan suddenly took a step forward and lovesickness was unsheathed. She looked at Qin Weibai coldly and her eyes were hesitant. I know what you want to do. In other words, I know you better than you know yourself. Since you said it's a warning, then it's a warning. Qin Weibai's voice gradually became cold. I really hate you like this. But I like Rushi very much. So from now on I don't want to see you again. Do you understand? How can you do that? Dongqing Yueshan was furious. Because I'm Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai slowly turned around and left the forest. If you dare to disobey me, you might as well continue your plan. If you really drive me crazy, you will bear the consequences. I promise you will regret it. She stepped forward. At that moment Dongqing Yueshan was about to make a move. Clatter. A dull sound suddenly rang out, but it sounded like thunder in Dongqing Yueshan's ears. In her sight, Qin Weibai's footsteps had landed. But another footstep sounded in the void after her footsteps landed, and it coincided with her footsteps. Dongqing Yueshan's face changed dramatically, and she stared at the surroundings of Qin Weibai. At this moment she realized that the reason why Qin Weibai dared to come over was that she was not alone at all. There was another superior hiding in the void, following her all the time. A superior that she didn't even notice. Saint couldn't do that, and neither could military counselor. The master of Samsara Palace. It could only be the master of Samsara Palace. Dongqing Yueshan suddenly broke out in a cold sweat. Qin Weibai's figure slowly disappeared in the night. Dongqing Yueshan stood where she was quietly. In front of her the void suddenly began to twist. In her sight the space in front of her was twisting and shaking. Two beautiful words gradually formed in the void and then became stable. Words were carved in the void. This was the real means of the invincible realm. Dongqing Yueshan stared at the two words, and the expression on her beautiful face kept changing, uncertain. That was the two words that everyone could recognize. But maybe only she understood what it meant. Chapter 221. In the hot and depressing night, Dongqing Rushi began to return, but Li Tianlan was moving forward. He had no choice but to move forward. The fierce fighting had lasted for a day and a night. Li Tianlan himself couldn't tell when he was separated from the others. The village in the number 3 defensive zone was like a hornet's nest. It was not until the real encirclement began that Li Tianlan realized that Jifeng Sword Raining School was not the only force stationed there. After the death of the Big Dipper and Wind Ghost, they broke out of the encirclement almost immediately. But before they rushed out of the forest, the elites of East Island from all directions had already surrounded them. The elites of the village behind the forest also moved out in large numbers. At least 1,000 people were like a torrent, instantly drowning them. There was only killing left. There was only fighting left. There were enemies in all directions and all of them were full of killing intent. Ice and fire roared, thunder flashed, airflow surged and gunshots roared. Li Tianlan could only rush in the predetermined direction with all his strength. From night to day until the moonlight faded and the sun rose, Li Tianlan found that he had lost contact with the people around him. Sunset shadow died. Deep dream disappeared. Dongqing Rushi disappeared. Du Hanin also disappeared. After he rushed out of one encirclement, he seemed to step into another one. The way back had been completely blocked. Under the almost carpet search of East Island elites, Li Tianlan could only flee in the opposite direction. One day and one night. In the quiet time near the end of the fourth day, Li Tianlan, who was covered in blood, was silently treating his wounds. A lot of blood had dried up on him and some of it was still flowing. Some of the blood belonged to him but most of it belonged to others. Looking from a distance, Li Tianlan was completely covered in blood now. He threw his torn shirt aside. On his back, there was a knife wound so deep that the bone could be seen, as if it was directly carved there and blood was flowing. The sword wound was nearly 30 centimeters long and a lot of blood gushed out of the wound. Li Tianlan tore off a piece of bark and bit it in his mouth. His whole body shook. A layer of fire burned directly on his back. The condensed fire spread along his back and quickly covered the whole wound. Humph! Li Tianlan bit the bark hard. Under the sharp pain, his face suddenly became distorted and pale, but his eyes were full of indifference and chilling tranquility. The wounds and large pieces of flesh were burnt by the fire and barely healed together. Li Tianlan's expression was cold, and the flames on his fingertips rose again. His chest, abdomen, arms, thighs and some relatively shallow wounds were all burnt little by himself. Cold sweat kept flowing down his forehead. Li Tianlan, whose whole body seemed to emit a burnt smell, had a twisted face, but his calm eyes gradually revealed a kind of crazy chill. The flame wiped the last wound on his body. Li Tianlan, who was on the verge of collapse, moved his body and leaned against the tree behind him. He took out the almost bitten-through piece of bark from his mouth and ate it without looking at it. Only one day had passed. But Li Tianlan was completely different. For nearly a day and a night, East Island obviously regarded him as the main target of encirclement and suppression. After they blocked his retreat route intentionally or unintentionally, the lineup they sent after him was also suffocatingly luxurious. At first, hundreds of people chased after him non-stop, and then 2 Thundershocking Realm experts joined the team. In less than 6 hours, the Thundershocking Realm experts increased from 2 to 4. Then the half-step Invincible Realm experts showed up in person. The mighty chase of hundreds of people finally dispersed. In the end, it turned into a hunting team led by 2 half-step Invincible Realm experts, 5 Thundershocking Realm experts, and almost 20 Fire-Flaming Realm experts. Such a lineup was just to chase after a young man. East Island had paid great attention to him. Li Tianlan himself didn't know how many people he had killed. Elites of the Qi-controlling realm and the ice-condensing realm died under the human emperor's hands one after another. He rushed from the forest to the highway, then into the mountains and finally into the forest. He fled all the way to the edge of the battlefield. And the strength of the people chasing him was getting stronger and stronger. This was totally the cruelest battle he had encountered since he came to East Island. He only remembered that he killed a Thundershocking Realm expert on the other side in the process of fleeing, and the horrible wound on his back was left at that time. The expert of the half-step Invincible Realm attacked in person. That saber and the sword light crisscrossed the forest, almost splitting his body in half. The crazy killing and fighting made him release his deliberately suppressed killing intent and fighting intent uncontrollably. In this state, Li Tianlan's every move carried a kind of sharpness and danger that couldn't be concealed. The high concentration of his willpower made his vigilance and fighting instinct rise to the limit. In the escape and fighting, his speed was getting faster and faster and his attacks were getting fiercer and fiercer. The flying blood splashed in the screams. He seemed to gradually erase all the emotions except killing. It was like he was awakening or transforming. His willpower kept breaking the limit, and the imperfect heavenly king heart became more and more perfect. The unique technique of Zhuanyuantai focused on the state of mind. The 24 moves of sword, especially the most powerful moves of the absolute sword, demanded more willpower than anything else. In an almost hopeless environment, Li Tianlan saw an opportunity for himself to become stronger. Therefore, although he was fleeing, he did not retreat. Otherwise, in the process of this chase, Li Tianlan saw at least 2 opportunities for him to rush out. Although he wasn't absolutely sure, at least he could get closer to the elites of Zhongzhou state. But he kept going deep into the enemy's rear and quietly made an arc near the edge of the battlefield. He put himself at death's door. As for whether there would be a light at the end of the tunnel, he didn't even think about it. In the constant chasing and fighting, the desire for powerful strength became a little stronger and became an obsession. He almost instinctively pursued more powerful strength and a more perfect state of mind. This kind of obsession even went beyond life and death. Vaguely he felt oppressed or suppressed. It was as if there was an unknown power, or rather a power that he had forgotten, that kept on suppressing his increasingly perfect martial will. It was like a shackle, like a shackle. Li Tianlan didn't know what it was. But as his willpower and concentration kept surpassing the peak in the battle of life and death, the shackles that he ignored and forgot also began to disappear little by little and completely collapsed. It seemed to be right in front of him. Li Tianlan silently gnawed the bark in his hand. Without any replenishment, he sucked the bitter juice of the bark and swallowed the chewed wood. In a trance. He seemed to have returned to many years ago, to the era when he would rather gnaw the bark than drink the smelly porridge. The hard and resilient bark pierced the corner of his mouth. Li Tianlan's eyes were calm, but the corners of his mouth were bleeding, and he was grinning hideously. His aura, which was originally weak, continued to rise. Silent but hysterical madness with a sharp edge brewed and whistled from him, and finally became violent. At this moment, Li Tianlan was like a blazing sun. But it emitted a dark light. This bastard's speed is too fast. In the forest 1 kilometer away from Li Tianlan, a thunder-shocking realm expert in charge of chasing Li Tianlan was gnashing his teeth and cursing, but his footsteps did not stop at all. After nearly a day and a night of pursuit, it was not easy for the escapees, but it was also a kind of torture for the pursuers. In the hunting team, except for the 2 half-step invincible realm experts who looked normal, even several thunder-shocking realm experts, including the 2 experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, were tired and pale, not to mention others. They poured sugary liquids into their mouths as they walked. 6 hours ago, the hunting squad had become scattered and disorganized. In the beginning, 2 half-step invincible realm experts led the team, 5 thunder-shocking realm experts were in the middle, and 18 fire-flaming realm experts were in the rear. But now only 4 or 5 of the 18 fire-flaming realm experts could barely keep up, and the others had fallen far behind. The formation had been scattered and the hunting team had become a real team. If it weren't for the saber strike that directly injured Li Tianlan not long ago, perhaps most of the members of the hunting team would have lost their confidence. There are 2 idioms in Zhongzhou state: an arrow at the end of its flight, or the last radiance of the setting sun. He can't hold on for long. Inform the nearby elites to outflank him from 4 directions. Let's take our time. Don't push him too hard and try to capture him alive. A man walking in the front spoke slowly. He was extremely short and had a baby face. At first glance he looked like a child of 14 or 15 years old. But the so-called child had an extremely fierce aura at this time, and the fierce aura made everyone subconsciously keep a distance from him. He walked alone in the front, like a flash of saber light in the dark. Fierce and dazzling. His code name was Dal. He was one of the deputy commanders of the Divine Wind Force. He was a veteran expert who had been famous for nearly 20 years, and also one of Shinichi Miyamoto's most trusted confidants. With his strength, he was naturally qualified to stay in the temporary headquarters in the mountain, but Shinichi Miyamoto put him outside. Obviously, he wanted him to be the most powerful executor. That little bastard, don't fall into my hands. A thunder-shocking realm expert muttered to himself with resentment and anger in his eyes. What can I do if I fall into your hands? The baby smiled. There were even 2 deep dimples on his baby face which could hide his real age very well, and he looked a little cute. The thunder-shocking realm expert who spoke first paused and kept silent. He was also from the Divine Wind Force and he had a high status in the Divine Wind Force. In his position he naturally knew some secrets, and he also knew the importance of Li Tianlan to East Island. This man, if they could capture him alive, they could never kill him. The best way to deal with him was to rope him in and ask him to surrender. It's said that His Majesty has said that if he catches Li Tianlan, as long as he is willing to surrender, he can choose any of the 2 unmarried royal princes, and they can even follow him. This is really... Another superior of the half-step invincible realm said thoughtfully and then shook his head. Everyone else was shocked at the same time. The Mikado had 3 daughters now. The eldest daughter, Princess Yukiko, was married, and the other 2 royal princes were still unmarried. They were a pair of world-famous beauties and many people were coveting them. In order to rope Li Tianlan in, the Mikado was willing to let the 2 royal princes follow him, which showed how important Li Tianlan was, but it also showed how embarrassed East Island was now. It's really funny. Baby Doll shook his head and gave his evaluation in a knowing manner. The other superior of the half-step invincible realm with the code name Thousand Face smiled and didn't say anything. He was a burly man who looked very handsome and majestic, but now he was willing to stand behind the baby. The difference in their strength was obvious. When the baby was about to continue talking, the phone suddenly rang. He frowned and picked up the phone. After listening to a few words, his face changed dramatically. The phone was hung up in a hurry. His baby face quickly became gloomy and he was silent. "What's wrong?" Thousand Face frowned and asked. "Half an hour ago, Azure Dragon Gong Sun Chi raided our number 6 stronghold, and 80 elites were all killed. Besides, the Polar Ground Alliance and the Heroes Club joined the battle." The baby's tone was cold. "Gong Sun Chi." Thousand Face was shocked. In the whole Dark World, Azure Dragon Gong Sun Chi of Zhongzhou State seemed to be the first person under the Invincible Realm. Such a figure should have been the key force to change the situation in the final battle, but now he couldn't wait to take action when the final battle just broke out. Obviously, they were equally determined to rescue Li Tianlan. Half an hour ago it was Gong Sun Chi. Now maybe Tribulation, Firmament and others had started to take action. The number 6 stronghold was not far from the village where Li Tianlan was ambushed at first. It wasn't a stronghold. Near the village, there were thousands of special warfare elites of East Island stationed. Thousand Face's face changed in an instant. In order to rescue Li Tianlan, Zhongzhou State was going to rush directly through the area where they were stationed? Did they think it was the time of the final battle? This was definitely an accident. But there were more than one accident. The participation of the Polar Ground Alliance and the Heroes Club was also a huge variable. Thousand Face's face was gloomy. He gritted his teeth and said, "What should we do? Let's go back and support them." They came to catch Li Tianlan for the victory of the final battle of Changdao. Now Zhongzhou State was attacking where they were, and even figures like Gong Sun Chi took action in person. If they didn't go back to support them, the consequences would be unpredictable. Besides, the Heroes Club and the Polar Ground Alliance were eyeing them covetously. It was impossible for them to help East Island at all. Instead, they would hit them when they were down. He and the Thousand-Faced Assassin were both half-step invincible realm experts. This was the power that was enough to change the situation of the battle. At this time it was not worth it to be dragged here by Li Tianlan. Moreover, the current Li Tianlan was not worthy of their efforts. Ice Bird, Black Shield continued to chase after Li Tianlan. Ice Bird will take over the command of the nearby area and order the nearby elites to surround him. "The rest of you follow me," Baby Doll said straightforwardly. He glanced at the depths of the forest with a hint of unwillingness in his eyes. He sneered regretfully and said, "Don't worry, he has been hit by my saber. He won't be able to hold on for long. Right now he's definitely not a match for any of you. After capturing him, immediately bring him back to the command center." Ice Bird understands. Among the 5 Thundershocking Realm experts, a beautiful and cold woman took a step forward and said in a deep voice. She and Black Shield were both experts at the peak of the Thundershocking Realm. Any one of them was enough to make Li Tianlan go all out in his heyday. Now that Li Tianlan was seriously injured and they had the cooperation of many nearby elites, catching Li Tianlan was a piece of cake. A hint of unwillingness flashed in Baby Doll's eyes again, but he did not dare to continue to delay. He and Thousand-Faced Assassin took the other 3 Thundershocking Realm experts and directly rushed back. Because she was too excited, Ice Bird's cold and beautiful face directly flushed, which was as delicate and beautiful as a flower. She naturally knew what Baby Doll was unwilling to accept. They had been chasing Li Tianlan for a day and a night, and none of them had given up. It was not because Li Tianlan was worthy of so many forces chasing after him, but because the credit for catching Li Tianlan was too great. Now with the departure of Baby Doll and Thousand-Faced Assassin, the credit would fall on her. The figures of Baby Doll and Thousand-Faced Assassin disappeared at the end of her sight. Ice Bird took a deep breath and suddenly turned around. She glanced at Black Shield, who was silent, and said without hesitation, "Go." Less than a dozen meters behind Ice Bird and Black Shield, the void fluctuated imperceptibly. What an idiot. Evil, the only invincible realm killer in the Dark World, sneered. Then he restrained all his aura and followed behind the two quietly. As an invincible realm expert, he could be said to be one of the first people to find Li Tianlan's traces. The two were even 20 meters away from each other when they were closest to each other. But Evil never made a move. He really did not lie to Shinichi Miyamoto. He did feel a kind of vague danger from Li Tianlan, the weak young heavenly son. This feeling was very strange, but it made him not dare to act rashly. Now Li Tianlan was seriously injured. It was good to let the two idiots in front of him test the water first. Evil's figure completely merged into the void. He held a ring-like emerald disc in his hand and was getting closer and closer to Li Tianlan. Under the tree hundreds of meters ahead, Li Tianlan swallowed the last piece of bark and his calm eyes suddenly lit up. Two footsteps were getting closer and closer to him. There were only two people. In the darkness, he held the human emperor and stood up calmly. The crazy killing intent instantly surged around him. When his willpower was absolutely concentrated, he once again felt the unknown shackles, and he also saw an opportunity. He raised his arm and the gun. Li Tianlan took a step forward in the direction where the pursuers were rushing from. It was a small step, but it was also a big step. With this step, Li Tianlan's aura suddenly soared from the stabilization phase of the ice-condensing realm to the peak. The fourth day was coming to an end. Chapter 222. It soared. The silver human emperor was fully stretched out, and the 2-meter-long spear body was lifted. Li Tianlan's killing intent began to rise almost limitlessly. The feeling of being imprisoned grew stronger and stronger. He could clearly feel the existence of the shackle, as if someone had suppressed or temporarily erased some memories, which even affected his will that he had always thought was perfect. The feeling that he could touch it but could not break it became more and more obvious. Li Tianlan became more and more agitated and even vaguely felt that he was about to suffocate. Break the shackle. Li Tianlan suddenly let out a long roar, and the uncontrollable killing intent in the forest became boiling and violent. In this state, Li Tianlan was crazy, dangerous, and ferocious like a demon. Ice Bird and Black Shield seemed to have received a signal. Li Tianlan's long roar was so clear and undisguised. Without any hesitation, the two of them rushed over. Li Tianlan did not move. The two blue electric lights, which were extremely clear in the night, broke through the forest, approached quickly, and finally hovered in the air in front of him. How dare you stop? Ice Bird stood in front of the Black Shield and sneered. She was an extremely beautiful and charming woman. She had a plump figure and soft facial features, but her beautiful eyes were filled with cold light. She looked awe-inspiring and cold. She spoke Chinese and her pronunciation was perfect. With just the two of you, you really dared to chase after me? Li Tianlan's tone was calm, but his momentum was completely violent. The crazy killing intent turned into sword intent as he spoke, and the whole forest seemed to be shaking under the sword intent. So what if there are only two of us? I admit that you have unlimited potential, but do you really think that you can make us fight with you now? If we hadn't been afraid that you would do something desperate, you would have fallen into our hands or become a dead man. Ice Bird said blandly. She was indeed a very charming woman, confident and peaceful. Even when she was hostile, she still maintained her demeanor. In the darkness with extremely low visibility, the blue electric lights made her indescribably dazzling, and her clothes fluttered in the wind, which was pleasing to the eye. Ha! Li Tianlan smiled, and the tranquility in his pupils had completely turned into a dead silence, which looked enchanting and deep. You're badly injured. I don't recommend fighting with us. If you're willing to go back to Dongdu with us, I can guarantee that East Island won't hurt you, and will give you the best treatment, power, status, women, whatever you want. You can even choose the inner princes of the imperial family. Ice Bird promised in a solemn and sincere tone. This was definitely not a lie, and it was even too general. Li Tianlan's value was definitely worth East Island's great efforts to win him over. If he was willing to join East Island, the royal family would do anything. After all, even if this young governor of Sai City in Zhongzhou State couldn't change the position of Sai City, he could influence Samsara Palace to a great extent. Besides, his potential was terrifying enough. If such a figure joined East Island, he could change more than just the Battle of Changdao, and he could even affect East Island's position in the Dark World in the future. If such a figure joined East Island sincerely, his position in East Island would probably surpass all the princes of the imperial family, and he would become one of the most important figures in the whole East Island in the future. Ice Bird's tone became more and more sincere, and she continued, "As long as you're willing to join us, we're willing to help you investigate your father's treason case, and declare war on Kunlun City. We'll do our best to help you get revenge. Please believe in our sincerity." When the time was right, with Li Tianlan and the treason case as the primer, East Island was fully capable of setting off a storm in Zhongzhou State and seriously damaging the strength of Zhongzhou State. Icebird felt no pressure to make such a promise. "Are you done?" Li Tianlong suddenly asked. As he spoke, his hand holding the human emperor suddenly stabilized and no longer trembled. In an instant, the killing intent on Li Tianlong's body rose to the peak. "You?" Icebird frowned, but before she finished speaking in her sight, Li Tianlong had already taken a gentle step forward. Dozens of meters away, a spot of silver light suddenly enlarged. Just one step. The ferocious and exquisite body of the human emperor, with a blazing fire, had already appeared in front of her chest. Li Tianlong was definitely a straightforward person. If he could make a move, he would never waste time. He barely suppressed the sharp pain in his body, and at the moment when his momentum was at its peak, he directly attacked without hesitation. "Go all out." Icebird, who had been prepared for this, retreated in an instant. The dazzling lightning roared out around her in an instant. The twisted electric arc twisted and spread in the air, and the fire turned into sparks falling in the lightning. Only the silver spear was still stabbing straight ahead, pressing forward with indomitable will. Clang! A heavy long saber hacked hard on the human emperor, and the bright saber light was completely covered by the lightning. The blade cut through the air and the sound was like thunder. The sound of gold and iron colliding rang out. A large expanse of lightning bloomed where the saber and the spear collided, and countless trees were completely shattered by the huge force. Icebird's figure was blocked by a burly and dark Black Shield. Black Shield was expressionless. He clenched the long saber with both hands, and the violent power suddenly poured into his arms. He chopped down hard with the saber. Li Tianlong did not dodge, but his figure became faint in an instant. There was only a shadow left in front of Black Shield, and Li Tianlong had already appeared behind him. The long spear whistled in the air, and the huge spear shadow smashed madly at Black Shield's back. The saber cut through the shadow. Black Shield growled, and the momentum of the saber instantly turned into a sweep. The heavy blade went up against the momentum. In the dazzling light and shadow, Li Tianlong pressed down wildly with the long spear in his hand, and at the same time, kicked Black Shield hard in the chest. Swish! The sharp sword cut through the air and the sharp sound of the air being cut rang out. The sound seemed to come from afar, but in the blink of an eye, it had reached Li Tianlong's back. Dark ambush. It was the most quintessential unique skill of Wuji Palace, which combined hiding, killing, dodging and attacking. The figure of Icebird, who had been forced back by the spear, seemed to suddenly appear in the void. Holding a short saber, she became one with the saber and directly crashed into Li Tianlong. In the dazzling light and shadow, a roar suddenly came out that went straight into the sky. The sound was so fierce and clear, and it was a kind of madness and violence that ignored everything. The long spear moved rapidly along the blade from the tip to the hilt, and Black Shield's hand holding the saber slid down. The ferocious and elegant spear tip and blade of the human emperor swept through the void. Then, controlling the sword with the spear. The eighth blade, burning sky. Li Tianlong's already extremely high aura rose again in an instant. After successfully breaking through from the stabilization phase of the ice-condensing realm to the peak phase, Li Tianlong once again began to forcibly use his peak state. He did not forcibly restore to the thundershocking realm, but the power of this sword was infinitely close to the half-step thundershocking realm. With Li Tianlong as the center, the violent sword intent broke out unscrupulously around him. The flames rose to the sky, and the sword energy swept in all directions like a spreading halo. For a moment, both Black Shield and Icebird could not help but retreat. The two were facing in completely opposite directions. As they retreated, the distance between them was suddenly widened. Li Tianlong's body bore the great power beyond his realm, and the severe pain seemed to tear his flesh. He roared wildly, and the absolutely condensed willpower hit the shackles in his mind. The shackles were trembling, and Li Tianlong's body was also shaking. At all costs, Li Tianlong roared. In the sword intent of the eighth blade, which had not yet subsided, he suddenly raised his long spear and rushed to Icebird. There was no shadow formula or 24 moves of sword. The silver light whistled in the air. This was Li Tianlong's purest strength and speed. It was surging. Where the silver spear pointed, everything was destroyed. The sixth blade drifting cloud. It was the most distant and freehand move in the 24 moves of sword, but in Li Tianlan's hands, it became an extremely violent and domineering move. The long spear was like a meteor stabbing Ice Bird in the air. The long spear was moving forward. Li Tianlan's figure seemed to have disappeared. There was only a silver spear left in Ice Bird's eyes. It was a pure spear, an arrogant spear, a spear that looked down on the world and regarded the whole world as nothing. At this moment, Li Tianlan's willpower was focused to the highest point in his life, and the strong shackles in his mind finally began to break bit by bit. Break. Ice Bird's sharp and long howl pierced the eardrums. In the face of this unavoidable blow, she did not step back at all. The short knife in her hand, which was different from the black shield style, was suddenly raised. She let go. The long knife hung in the air. Ice Bird's arms opened and shook violently. Lightning sputtered like a waterfall. A curtain-like light composed of pure lightning directly blocked in front of Ice Bird. The dazzling blue light was extremely restrained, and the lightning, which looked a little dim, was like water mist, completely blocked Ice Bird's figure behind. This was one of the strongest defensive unique skills in Wuji Palace, even in the entire East Island and even in the entire Dark World. Invincible protection. In terms of defensive power, this was definitely the most headache-inducing unique skill. But the biggest drawback of this move was that it could not exist for a long time. To be exact, this light curtain could only exist for a short moment. But this moment was enough for Ice Bird. The moment the silver light in her sight was about to approach. The light curtain was completely formed. Boom! The silver spear and the light curtain collided fiercely. Li Tianlan's pupils were as bright as stars, and all his power burst out at the same time. Forward. He would rather die than retreat. The light curtain shook violently, and the almost invincible human emperor kept tightening. The body of the spear began to bend in the strong impact, as if it could not bear the gravity and was about to collapse. Ah 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 ah! Li Tianlan roared wildly. At the moment when his willpower rose to the apex, a slight cracking sound rang out, extremely clear. At this moment, Li Tianlan could clearly feel that the shackles in his mind were completely broken. Pictures suddenly appeared in his mind one after another. They were the suppressed memories, or rather the suppressed willpower. The Li family has two unique skills. The map of God of War is well known in the world, and the other is not a unique skill, which is hypnosis. This is the extreme of hypnosis, which was left by the founder together with the map of God of War, just like the 24 moves of Sword of the Li family. I can use this to suppress your willpower. If you can break through one day, you will be invincible when you are 30 years old. Those pictures that had been suppressed in the deepest part of his memory emerged one after another, more and more. With the soft bell sound in the depths of his memory that seemed to ripple into the depths of his soul, all kinds of pictures kept flashing. The human emperor kept hitting the light curtain in front of him. His willpower had a breakthrough in all aspects. Although his realm had not changed, his sword intent was several times sharper and purer than just now. You have to remember that the real invincibility is not the unique skill or the realm. For the Li family, the invincibility is the sword intent and only the sword intent. I have a bright pearl. For me, my martial arts should not only be about the sword. The 24 moves of sword are the martial arts of the founder, but not all of them are mine. One day I will surpass the founder. It had been locked up for a long time. I have been mediocre all my life. I seem to be high-spirited, but in fact I am indecisive. Pamon, I have a dilemma. I don't know how to make a decision, so I can only be impartial. You fight for the Li family. If one day you are smashed to pieces, I hope you won't blame me. What do you mean? If you can get out, you will know. I was wrong. Today the dust had cleared. Some things are done. Remember, don't look back. It shone through the mountains and rivers. Boom. The tip of the spear was twisted in the light curtain. Ripples spread in the light curtain, turbulent, and finally broke. Pictures and a large number of memories hit his mind. The memory was so clear. Everything in his sight was so clear. The broken light curtain flew in all directions in the explosion. The absolute power exploded in the collision and directly turned into a wave of air filled with blue electric arcs. The air wave was spreading, and the forest within a radius of tens of meters was completely flattened in the deafening sound. The ice bird in the front and the black shield in the back were completely unbalanced in the air wave and flew backward. Li Tianlan was teetering in the center of the air wave, but his eyes had turned from trance to clarity. The ice bird with an incredulous face drifted in the air wave. This rare beauty in the dark world opened her small mouth and struggled in the air, looking helpless and delicate. It shone through the mountains and rivers. He whispered to himself and suddenly clenched the broken spear head of the human emperor. He lifted the pen and the spear. Li Tianlong suddenly raised his hand. The human emperor turned into a straight silver light in the air and was thrown out by him. The silver light flashed and the sharpness was shocking. The human emperor drew a straight line in the air. In the irresistible sharpness, the broken spear head directly penetrated into the mouth of the ice bird. In an instant, the beautiful head completely shattered. In the darkest time before dawn, it directly burst into a mist of blood. When the darkness grew thicker, the morning was already close at hand. Where there was night, there would be morning. Chapter 223. As the most elite super-large comprehensive corps of Xianxia state, once a war broke out, the Border Praetorian Corps would be the first to be familiar with the enemy's artillery and the backbone to undertake a large number of combat tasks. In times of peace, it was the iron wall of Xianxia state, and in times of war, it was the sharp sword of Xianxia state. This super force of nearly 600,000 people had been given too many sacred duties by the whole Xianxia state since its establishment. It had been glorious to the peak and had fallen to the bottom. Since Dongqing Wudi, the god of massacre of Xianxia state, took charge of the Border Control Corps, the light of the Border Control Corps was still dazzling. It was a blood-red light. Dongqing Wudi made the Border Control Corps because he pulled the most destitute Border Control Corps out of the shadow of the treason case. The Border Control Corps also made Dongqing Wudi. Because of the existence of the Border Control Corps, Dongqing Wudi's god of massacre could be famous in the dark world. Thunderbolt, Pegasus, Blood, Wild Sand and Black Dragon. These 5 corps could be said to be the most important parts of the Border Praetorian Corps, and Dongqing Wudi basically spent most of the year in these 5 corps. The Pegasus Corps was stationed on the border of Tibet in Xianxia state. The headquarters of the Blood Battalion was located on the border of Nanyun. The Wild Sand Battalion guarded the Beijiang of Xianxia state. The Black Dragon Corps guarded the northeast gate of Xianxia state. The Thunderbolt Corps was directly under the command of Dongqing Wudi, the commander of the Border Control Corps. It was also the smallest troop with a total size of less than 20,000 people, but they were all the elites of the elites. Dongqing Wudi had been in control of the Border Control Corps for nearly 20 years, and the Thunderbolt Corps had always followed him. Wherever the god of massacre pointed, the Thunderbolt Corps would follow. This was a real battle-hardened army. Each of the more than 20,000 people in it could be said to be Dongqing Wudi's personal soldiers and the greatest pride of the Border Control Corps. The beginning of August was destined to be an eventful period in the Dark World. North America was in turmoil, Northern Europe was in constant chaos, and the final battle of Changdao was hanging in the balance. East Asia was in turmoil again. There was a sudden chaos in the south of Annan state which bordered Zhongzhou state. The Scorpion organization, which had disappeared in Annan state for nearly a decade, revived. As soon as it appeared, it had the momentum of starting a prairie fire. In just a few days, the Scorpion organization had occupied 3 cities in the south of Annan state. In less than 2 days, it was said that the Scorpion organization had more than 100,000 people. The Annan state was in chaos and the international news was in an uproar. The Annan government, under great pressure, immediately transferred the military forces in the north to the southern battlefield to encircle the Scorpion organization. Intentionally or unintentionally, the northern part of Annan state bordering Nanyun of Zhongzhou state became unprecedentedly empty. The land in the northern part of Annan state was now almost unguarded and exposed to the sight of Zhongzhou state. Under this kind of delicate and complicated situation, the nearly 20,000 elites of the Thunderbolt Battalion were all dispatched, directly heading south into South Cloud Province. Marshal Dongqing Wudi, the god of massacre of Zhongzhou state, personally led the Thunderbolt Battalion to the headquarters of the Blood Battalion. For a moment, the whole world was shocked, and countless people's eyes began to shift from East Island to the border of Zhongzhou state. Even some countries that had cooperated with Zhongzhou state to suppress the currency of East Island expressed doubts. Regardless of whether they understood what was going on or not, their actions clearly expressed the hope that Zhongzhou state would remain rational. The Secretary of State of Star State even raised doubts at the United Nations meeting. He said that he did not understand the intention of the Thunderbolt Battalion of Zhou State to suddenly go south, and further suggested that Zhou State withdraw the Thunderbolt Battalion. The spokesman of Gaul also euphemistically said that when the northern part of Annan State was empty and its main force was suppressing the rebellion in the south, the behavior of the Thunderbolt Battalion going south would only cause panic and misunderstanding in Annan State. The spokesman of the British state was sharper. The other side almost made it clear that Zhou State had bad intentions. He not only suggested that Zhou State withdraw the Thunderbolt Battalion, but also suggested that the Blood Battalion stationed on the border of Nanyun should also withdraw some distance at the same time to show sincerity. In this regard, the spokesman of Zhou State who attended the United Nations meeting just sneered without any explanation. Dongqing Wudi was even more straightforward. In an environment where both sides were well aware of it, in the voice of doubt, the god of massacre of Zhou State not only did not order a retreat, but directly ordered the Blood Battalion and the Thunderbolt Battalion to advance a distance of 10 kilometers. The international doubts turned into doubts, doubts into denunciations, denunciations eventually escalated into curses, and then almost repeated threats. Zhou State kept silent. The Border Control Corps didn't say a word. They just did their own things despite the clamor of the outside world. The border of Nanyun was sultry and oppressive. On a hillside less than 10 kilometers away from the border, Dongqing Wudi, who had just gotten up, flipped through the newspaper and narrowed his eyes slightly. The international pages of the newspaper were full of accusations and threats from other big countries against Zhou State. The tone was tough, and the accusations were similar to taking advantage of others' difficulties and losing the demeanor of a superpower. Dongqing Wudi glanced at it a few times, threw the newspaper aside and said with a sneer, "Clowns. They are good at acting, but that's all they can do. Sanctions? Bullshit." A strong man who was sleeping near him heard his voice, turned over in a daze and sat up from the stall. Under the yellowish light, it could be clearly seen that the sweat on the man's face was flowing down. He looked at Dongqing Wudi, who had put on his military uniform, and said with a wry smile, "Marshal, don't you feel hot? Although the conditions of the Blood Battalion are ordinary, in the temporary camp, the marshal's tent should be equipped with an air conditioner or an electric fan. What are you doing?" As he said this, he stood up from the blanket. As he moved, his body was suddenly covered with a thin layer of ice. When the thin ice appeared, there was suddenly a little coolness in the stuffy tent. Experiencing life. Dongqing Wudi didn't look back. He lit a cigarette and said in a calm tone, "This damn life." The man cursed, looking puzzled. He was as tall as Dongqing Wudi. He was thin, but his face was extremely rough. His dark skin shone with an oily luster and he looked extremely strong and fierce. However, at this time this general of Zhou State, whose words carried weight in the Blood Battalion, stood next to Dongqing Wudi without any power. He was honest and even a little honest. General Wang Wantian, the commander of the Blood Battalion. This was Dongqing Wudi's old subordinate. He was also one of Dongqing Wudi's most trusted people in the Border Control Corps. There is a place near here that also has no air conditioner or electric fan. It has been many years. Dongqing Wudi walked out of the tent with a cigarette in his mouth, and his expression was calm. "I'm going out for a walk." More than 100,000 people in the Blood Battalion, plus less than 20,000 people in the Thunderbolt Battalion, had dispersed 2 days ago. The army was scattered on the long border, ready to fight. At this time, Dongqing Wudi was at the forefront of the border. Only 10,000 elites of the Thunderbolt Battalion were left here. The 10,000 people used this hillside closest to the border as a temporary camp. A large number of tents were pitched on the ground, endless. Although it was not as desolate and heroic as the headquarters of the Blood Battalion, it had its own silent and iron-blooded flavor. Dongqing Wudi moved forward slowly. After less than a kilometer, there appeared a big drum with a diameter of nearly 5 meters in front of him. The material of the big drum was like wood. It had stood on the border for decades, weathered by the wind and the sun, but it had not changed at all. This drum was called Family and Country, and 19 years ago it was called Xianyuan. This was a big drum that could withstand the full force of a half-step invincible realm expert. This was the big drum that Li Honghe, the patriarch of the Li family, had personally built on the border. There were 13 big drums on the border between Nanyun and Annan State. When the war broke out, the sound of the drums was enough to spread over hundreds of kilometers of the border. When the war broke out, when all advanced means of communication were ineffective, the way of drumming became particularly important. Therefore, the drum language was basically something that every soldier of the Border Praetorian Corps could understand. Dongqing Wudi came to the big drum and picked up the drumsticks. When the sun rose on the horizon, the dull drum sound vibrated several times in an instant, spreading through the mountains and rushing into the forest. After a while, the 13 big drums sounded at the same time. The drum sound was dull, resounding through the border, but conveying only one meaning. In this battle, no one was left alive. All the soldiers heard it. And now, in a small camp that did not belong to the Border Praetorian Corps in a meteorite forest on the border, everyone also heard it. The drum sound was vague and clear. It spread to this camp and also broke the silence of this camp. In an attic near the center of the camp, Li Honghe, who had stayed here for nearly 20 years, walked out of the door and looked at the distant sky in a trance. Listening to the drum sound that seemed to be near and far, he murmured, "It's Xianyuan. No, it's the homeland now." The morning wind blew his shabby clothes. The old man slowly went downstairs with a complicated expression. All the people in the camp were awakened by the drum sound. They silently walked out of their dormitories and came to the old man. The old man walked to the center of the camp and stood under the Zhongzhou state star flag fluttering in the camp. He looked at the flying flag in silence. After a long while, he took a gentle step forward. "Your Highness." In the crowd gathered behind him, a voice sounded in a complicated tone. Li Honghe slowly turned around and looked at these old subordinates who had been with the Li family for many years, with a peaceful look in his eyes. In his sight, there were faces full of entanglement. "The knot in your heart hasn't been solved?" After a long silence, he looked at the crowd in front of him and suddenly asked with a chuckle, "How to solve it?" Another voice sounded in the crowd, full of bitterness and even a little ferocious. Li Honghe didn't look at who was speaking but said gently, "If you can't solve it, then don't. We're soldiers. The drum of the homeland is beating and the war is about to start. What do you think I should do?" There was only silence in the crowd. Dead silence. No one spoke. Li Honghe looked at them quietly. There was no disappointment or joy in his eyes, only calmness. After a long time, Li Honghe slowly turned around and slowly reached out to the star flag standing in front of him. "I can understand you, so you don't have to ask me where you're going. I'm not the god of war, but I'm still a soldier. So I'll go." He paused and continued, "You can stay or go to the war, but you don't have to go with me." He abruptly exerted strength in his hand that was holding the flagpole and directly uprooted the flagpole that was several meters tall. The scarlet star flag surged in his hand and made a loud noise. Li Honghe's eyes were in a trance. He looked up at the scarlet above his sight and muttered to himself, "Old buddy, let's go." Chapter 224. When the dull drums echoed clearly on the border, General Wang Wantian, the commander of the Blood Battalion, also walked out of the tent and came behind Dongqing Wudi. Wang Wantian, dressed in military uniform, stood tall and straight. The golden general star shone in the sunlight. He stood upright behind Dongqing Wudi with a solemn expression, looking determined and decisive, full of murderous intent. Murderous intent. This was something that had been injected into everyone since the establishment of the Border Praetorian Corps, and it was carried forward in Dongqing Wudi's hands. For many years, the Border Control Corps could be said to be the most bloodthirsty army in the world. Have they arrived yet? The drums vibrated in the air. Dongqing Wudi, who was also in military uniform, had put down the drumsticks and turned to ask Wang Wantian behind him. "They're all on the way." Wang Wantian nodded and said, "I just called Han Bing. He should be able to arrive first." General Wang Wantian, the commander of the Blood Battalion. General Shi Hanbing, the commander of the Wild Sand Battalion. General Xiao Dongzhan, the commander of the Pegasus Battalion. General Qing Huaining, the commander of the Black Dragon Battalion. These four, together with Thunder God, the deputy commander of the Thunderbolt Battalion from the Dongqing clan, could be said to be the strongest 5 tiger generals in Dongqing Wudi's hands and one of the pillars of the entire Border Control Corps. When the entire Border Control Corps was under international public opinion, no one expected that Dongqing Wudi not only remained unmoved, but also directly conveyed a secret military order to let the commanders of the other 3 legions rush to the Nanyun border overnight. However, such news could not be kept a secret. It might be leaked in one day at the latest. One day, One day later, where would they be? Wang Wantian was in a daze and subconsciously looked at Dongqing Wudi in front of him. It seemed that the marshal did not want to hide such news from the beginning. Pass the order. Dongqing Wudi's cold voice sounded in front of him. Wang Wantian stood up straight reflexively. At this moment, the general, who was also famous in Zhongzhou state, seemed to have become the rash young man who charged recklessly after receiving Dongqing Wudi's order many years ago. Let Shihanbing come to see me. Qing Huaining goes to line 2 and Xiao Dongzhan to line 3. Don't take the initiative to attack unless there are special circumstances. Dongqing Wudi said slowly. Wang Wantian responded instinctively. Then he asked blankly, Marshal, are we going to make a move now? After all, Dongqing Wudi arrived at the Blood Battalion in a hurry. When the news of the Scorpion organization of Annan State reached Zhongzhou State, Dongqing Wudi rushed over as soon as possible, but it only took him 2 days. So many arrangements were made in a hurry and even a little rough. He only made a general arrangement. Nearly 200,000 people of the Blood Battalion had been scattered on the border of Nanyun and were simply divided into several key points. The headquarters of the Blood Battalion was the number 1 point with the fewest personnel left behind, but the most heavy firepower. The west side of the border was point 2, and the east side was point 3. The number of people was roughly equal. 3 points, more than 100,000 people had firmly guarded the territory of Zhongzhou State. The 10,000 elites of the Thunderbolt Battalion led by Dongqing Wudi were at the forefront. They were not responsible for guarding but taking the initiative to attack. Therefore, Dongqing Wudi called in the commanders of the other 3 legions and left Wang Wantian and Shihanbing at the forefront. Shihanbing and Wang Wantian followed Dongqing Wudi the earliest, and their strength was also the strongest. Both of them were very close to Dongqing Wudi's strength. The 3 masters plus the 10,000 elites of the Thunderbolt Battalion formed the sharpest knife on the border of Nanyun. Now the commanders of the other 3 legions had arrived at the border. With the 3 of them in place, everything seemed to be ready. It's not us who are going to move. It's them. Dongqing Wudi sneered and pointed to the direction of Annan State outside the border. His eyes were bloodthirsty and cold. He looked up at the rising sun in the east, took a deep breath and whispered, It's the 5th day. If we don't move now, they won't have time. Damn it. Wang Wantian clenched his fist and the dazzling blue lightning bloomed in his palm. In a trance, it seemed to overwhelm the sun on the horizon. Those people are so damn shameless. How dare they put pressure on us at the United Nations? Bullshit. Bad intentions? Who on earth has bad intentions? What are they? Who doesn't know that the Scorpion organization was subdued by Annan State several years ago? The whole Scorpion organization has been F*King reorganized into the Scorpion Corps. Rebellion? F*CK them. Enough. Dongqing Wudi said in a very low tone. His whole body was bathed in the rising golden sun, and his expression could not be seen. Wang Wantian shut his mouth with hatred. The Scorpion Rebellion is a rebellion. Now the northern forces of Annan State are empty. That's a fact. Dongqing Wudi said blandly. But they are not empty at all. The northern army did not move at all, but, Wang Wantian shouted with a fiery temper. You stubborn donkey, it's none of your business whether the Scorpion organization rebelled or not. If Annan State says there is a rebellion, then there is a rebellion. Isn't it normal for them to transfer troops from the north to suppress the rebellion? As for who and how many people will appear in the north of Annan State, it's none of Annan State's business. They have limited energy, so they are busy suppressing the rebellion. You have to tell the truth, you know. Do you think the international public opinion is not lively enough? A helpless voice suddenly rang out behind Wang Wantian. It was cold and indifferent. In the sun, a tall, thin and somewhat slender figure came slowly. He glanced at Dongqing Wudi, who had a smile at the corner of his mouth. He gave a military salute and said respectfully, Marshal. Shihanbing was just like his name. He was cold and expressionless. He had an unapproachable aura all over his body. Even in front of his immediate superior and old brothers, the indifference on his body only melted a little. Damn ice block, who are you calling stubborn donkey? Don't I understand what's going on? I just can't bear it. Wang Wantian stared at him and swore. That's enough. Dongqing Wudi waved his hand. Annan State is in the north. No, how many troops does the Scorpion have in the north of Annan State? It was a bit inappropriate, but Wang Wantian answered honestly, about 90,000 Annan state troops. Dongqing Wudi glanced at him and said nothing. Now there are no troops in the north of Annan state, only the rebels of the Scorpion. Hanbing reminded him calmly. Bullshit. Wang Wantian snorted. Do you really think you're different after changing the flag? They haven't even changed the equipment of the base. I can call them whatever I want. Time is short. We don't have time to arrange too much, and neither does Annan state. But stubborn donkey, if you don't want to get into trouble, you have to admit that they have nothing to do with Annan state. No matter how many people we kill today, they are the rebels of the Scorpion. Hanbing's tone was flat. I just don't know how many chips those people have given Annan state. Can they really afford such a big gamble? The Polar Ground Alliance, the Heroes Club, the Jiang family of South America, the Fantasy World, and Knights Templars, these 5 forces together, what chips can't they give? If necessary, Annan state is likely to say that all its troops are rebels. But now it seems that they still want to save face, so they didn't go too far. Dongqing Wudi said blandly, but the number is not small. 90,000 people plus the elites of the 5 forces, maybe they think it's enough? Marshal, they don't come with good intentions. Hanbing reminded him in a serious tone. The final battle of Chongdao had broken out, and the power of Zhongzhou state was now completely scattered. There were people of Zhongzhou state in Northern Europe, North America, and East Island. It was hard to say how much extra power Zhongzhou state had to pay attention to the border. Now it was the 5th day of the 7 days. The 5 forces took advantage of the scattered power of Zhongzhou state to plot the border. They would do anything. As long as they succeeded, they could even give up the interests of East Island. For the 5 forces, the best way was to end the war quickly and decide everything in 1 or 2 days. Otherwise, when the Battle of Chongdao was over and Zhongzhou state withdrew part of its power, everything would be too late. After all, this was different from the final Battle of Chongdao. When Zhongzhou state plotted against East Island, the Dark Forces were the first to take action, but the 5 forces were directly attacking the army of Zhongzhou state with the help of the rebels. This was completely different. Zhongzhou state didn't need to pay attention to any means or rules to deal with the rebels and invaders. Therefore, in 2 days they had to occupy Nanyun province and at least completely swallow the Blood Battalion of nearly 200,000 people. This was the common demand of the 5 forces. Now the final battle of Chongdao had reached a critical moment. Once the war broke out at the border of Zhongzhou state, it could not only restrain the experts of Zhongzhou state who wanted to go to Chongdao for support, but also put great psychological pressure on the people of Zhongzhou state in North America and Northern Europe. This was the conspiracy of the 5 forces. Even at the border, Zhongzhou state, which had the home advantage, might not be able to gain any advantage. It was no exaggeration to say that once the war started, the 4 battlefields would be full of variables. However, the biggest variable was not in these 4 battlefields. Marshal, are the higher-ups ready? Hanbing asked in a low voice. Yes, but the opponents are not idle. We can only fight to the death. Dongqing Wudi shook his head and sighed. Hanbing moved the corner of his mouth and murmured, the most important thing is Huating. 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 Wang Wantian's body shook violently. At this time Huating seemed calm and peaceful, but inside Huating, there were 5 invincible realm experts and countless foreign elites. Zhongzhou state was close to its limit by dividing 3 battlefields. If the border conflict broke out, how much power could Zhongzhou state spare to support the border control corps? Too little didn't work. If there were too many, what about Huating? The general trend was in chaos. Maybe Dongqing Wudi was right. Even if they were prepared under the change of the general trend, all they could do was to fight to the death. Chapter 225. The spear was awe-inspiring. It stood quietly on the ground, but it had a kind of spirit to roar between heaven and earth. It was an extraordinary spear. The spear was nearly 3 meters long and its entire body was jet black. It was huge and heavy, and its black body was engraved with dense embossed patterns that extended from the butt of the spear all the way to the barrel and then back again. The complicated patterns were connected to the exceptionally huge trigger, and it was done in one go as smooth as flowing water. An extraordinary spear. An earth-shaking spear. It was not ferocious or domineering, but it had an irresistible majesty. A big slender hand held the spear. The large sniper rifle, nearly 3 meters long, was raised by one hand and pointed to the distant sky outside the window. With a spear in hand, it shot into the sky. The invincible spear and the invincible man were the best in the world. Good spear. An old sigh with a smile came from behind. My nephew's greatest wish in his life is to develop a real famous gun. We have mad shot and sky attack, but they are all failures. There is still a long way to go before we can develop a real famous gun. What can be used is the best. Although a famous gun is strong, how many people can exert its greatest power? Even I can pull the trigger, but the trigger can't be pressed to the bottom. I can't exert its greatest power. It's a pity in my life. For hundreds of years, it must be the loneliest. Wang Tianzong stroked the big black spear in his hand gently. The black sniper rifle glowed, and the body of the spear seemed to be slightly distorted. The complicated patterns were also gently fluctuating and turning into other shapes. Famous guns are all alive. How can it be possible to force it with a dead thing? Wang Tianzong held the big black spear in his hand and continued to speak. My old man doesn't understand these things. Let him study it. At least it's not a bad thing. Dongqing Hongguang, who was standing behind Wang Tianzong, said with a smile. Wang Tianzong smiled and said no more. The patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. The old patriarch of the Dongqing clan. The two standing together had an extraordinary meaning for the whole Zhongzhou state. In fact, when the 7-day period of East Island spread to Zhongzhou state, the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun city had already started a series of contests. Although the contest was short, it was quite fierce. The final result was finally determined on the morning of the 5th day. Wang Tianzong appeared beside Dongqing Hongguang, while Gu Xingyun stayed in Huating. The winner and loser were clear. But it was still hard to say who suffered a loss, the Wang family of Beihai or Kunlun city. Old master, did I disappoint you by appearing here? Wang Tianzong turned around with a faint smile on his face and chuckled. Is there any difference? Is there? Dongqing Hongguang said calmly. Having retired for many years, the old master didn't care about worldly affairs, so he didn't beat around the bush. He was surprisingly frank. Neither you nor Gu Xingyun are the candidates I want. I don. Two of you. And two. And I have you, both of you. And I and you. There is still a difference. Wang Tianzong looked out of the window calmly. I know who you are thinking of. Situ Songyue is not in Zhongzhou state. Even if she is, she may not be able to survive this battle. In contrast, I think I am the most suitable choice. Dongqing Hongguang shook his head and said with a smile, maybe. Over the border of Nanyun, the helicopter flew at a low altitude, and the huge whistling sound of the rotors surged in the wind. Looking down through the cabin window, the large canopy of the primeval forest below rose and fell like waves as the helicopter moved forward. Who do you think will come this time? Dongqing Hongguang asked suddenly. Who knows? In such a big game, the one who comes will definitely come back, and it's a big guy. We can't know who it is until we see it. Wang Tianzong responded casually. You are confident. Dongqing Hongguang's tone was indifferent. It was hard to tell whether he was sighing with emotion or mocking. Wang Tianzong said softly in a calm tone, I am invincible. Dongqing Hongguang snorted. He seemed to want to refute something, but he didn't know how, so he could only close his eyes and rest. Why are you angry, old master? Although the Wang family of Beihai took advantage of the Dongqing clan this time, there will always be returns in the future. Brother Invincible won't be able to stay in the Border Control Corps for long, right? The Wang family of Beihai is willing to contribute to the future layout. Wang Tianzong suddenly smiled and said in a sincere tone. Dongqing Hongguang didn't open his eyes but said in a cold tone, if Gu Xingyun were here, I'm afraid he would give more. Indeed. Wang Tianzong agreed and said with a chuckle, but it's a pity that he can't come. In the 3-party game, old master has gained enough. Why do you take it seriously? We've already given out enough. Dongqing Hongguang sneered and said with no expression, if the Dongqing clan had an invincible realm expert, why would they take advantage of you now? The martial arts of the Dongqing clan specializes in killing intent, and there was indeed a famous figure in the dark world. In fact, it should be your father's generation, right? But later, you integrated the martial arts of Jade Pool and wanted to integrate killing intent and outburst. Now it seems that the effect is not so good. Maybe it has. It's not conclusive yet. Dongqing Hongguang interrupted Wang Tianzong. It's just 2 generations. The Dongqing clan will definitely have the strongest invincible realm expert, either now or in the future. Really? Wang Tianzong asked with a smile, but his eyes were shining with inexplicable brilliance. Dongqing Hongguang seemed to realize that he had said something wrong. His face changed slightly and he glared at Wang Tianzong without saying anything. The helicopter flew over the primeval forest and quickly approached the border. "They're coming." Wang Tianzong looked out of the window and suddenly said. In his sight, the 10,000 Thunderbolt Battalion led by Dongqing Wudi had appeared in front of him. Farther away through the primeval forest, standing on the helicopter and looking down, countless dense figures were constantly rushing forward. Countless figures were reuniting one after another. It was the territory of Annan State, but the vanguard troops had entered the border of Zhongzhou State. It was mighty. Like a black tide. Dongqing Hongguang was already standing beside Wang Tianzong, looking at the black tide at the end of his sight with a solemn expression. "I'm going," Wang Tianzong said slowly. He opened the door of the cabin and jumped down without hesitation. The wind was cold in the air. The black big spear in his hand was constantly deformed, broken and twisted in the violent wind. The unknown black metal changed very quickly. Finally, the big spear disappeared and in Wang Tianzong's hand, there was a ferocious-looking black arm guard. His body fell to the ground, and he looked at the arm guard on his right hand that covered his whole arm, expressionless. The 5 superpowers in the Dark World conspired to the border of Zhongzhou State and even used Annan State. This move made it clear that they wanted to annex the entire Blood Battalion and even Nanyun Province. Such a big plot, there must be a final figure. Knowing that he and Gu Xingyun were in Zhongzhou State, such a final figure was definitely a top enemy on the divine list. Wang Tianzong's biggest task in coming to the border this time was to kill the invincible realm expert pushed out by the 5 superpowers. As long as the opponent died, it would be time for Zhongzhou State to fight back. The general trend was turbulent. A slight tilt of the delicate balance was enough to affect the outcome. Wang Tianzong calmly stroked the black arm guard on his hand. The murderous weapon was in his hand. He was fearless. This black big spear and this black arm guard were the most precious weapons of the Wang family of Beihai. It ranked first among the 12 murderous weapons in the Dark World. The spear was named Human Emperor. The black tide rushed to the border. Tens of thousands of people charged from different directions, and the entire border jungle was shaking. But there was dead silence in front of Dongqing Wudi. The 10,000 elites of the Thunderbolt Battalion had already assembled. People all over the mountains stood in front of Dongqing Wudi in silence. Only their fanatical eyes were focused on Dongqing Wudi. There was no fear, only the most unyielding fighting spirit. Dongqing Wudi stood calmly under the war drum of the family and country. His face was calm. The footsteps at the border rushed over like a landslide and a tsunami, getting closer and closer. Vigorous and vigorous. Dongqing Wudi, who had been silent, finally took a step forward. There was no blood-boiling speech. His voice was very calm, and within the calmness, there was a kind of craziness that was suppressed to the extreme. If the armed forces of other countries enter the border of Zhongzhou State, they are invaders. Dongqing Wudi said in a low voice, which was not loud but clearly sounded in everyone's ears. "The enemy is coming. Thunderbolt Battalion, follow me to kill the enemy. None of our enemies will survive." Kill. The 10,000 Thunderbolt Battalion roared at the same time, like a tsunami. To Zhongzhou State. Facing everyone, the most legendary marshal of Zhongzhou State picked up his kettle and looked solemn. To the marshal. The 10,000 Thunderbolt Battalion picked up their kettles at the same time and said in unison. Dongqing Wudi suddenly burst out laughing. He raised his head, poured all the liquor in the kettle into his mouth and threw the kettle away. He turned around. In his sight, countless enemies rushed forward, all dressed in black. The vanguard troops had rushed into the forest. The mountains and plains were all covered with black clothes. They were armed to the teeth. Dongqing Wudi's eyes flashed with a trace of amazing killing intent, and he suddenly reached out his hand. Under the war drum of the family and country, the drumsticks suddenly fell into Dongqing Wudi's hands. Dongqing Wudi strode forward, and the drumsticks fell on the war drum of the family and country with all their strength. The fierce drumming sounded throughout the border in an instant. The war drum was like thunder, and the sound wave that swept everything went straight into the sky and shook the clouds away. Dongqing Wudi's roar sounded in the drumming, with the heroism and fighting spirit from the soul, shaking the sky. Chapter 226. The Thunderbolt Battalion marched on. The Blood Battalion defended to the death. This was the plan that had been made from the beginning. The war this time could be said to be unexpected. Time was tight and neither side was fully prepared. Once the real battle began, it would be a battle of fighting spirit. The scorching sun covered the barren mountains of the western region of Nanyan. Under the scorching sun, groups of soldiers of the Blood Battalion were busy shuttling back and forth. The military trucks at the foot of the mountain stopped and went. More and more heavy firepower weapons approached the barren mountains, and the whole mountain was in a solemn atmosphere. Lieutenant General Qing Huaining, the commander of the Black Dragon Battalion, stood quietly on the top of the mountain and looked at the busy scene below with a solemn face. The general, who had been guarding the northeast border of Zhou State all year round, did not look like a soldier at all. He was thin, elegant, and looked gentle. If he took off the prestigious military uniform, he would look more like a knowledgeable and gentle professor and scholar, or a Confucian general. The drums surged in the air like thunder. 13 family country drums sounded at the same time, covering the whole border of Nanyan. The drums were rough and heroic, with a kind of power that was enough to shake the soul. Qing Huaining listened to the drums that were getting more and more intense. Instead of being excited, a layer of fine sweat appeared on his forehead, and he looked eager and anxious. Hurry up. The movements of the soldiers at the foot of the mountain were nervous but orderly. Qing Huaining wiped the sweat on his forehead and whispered to himself. Huaining, the marshal has begun to exchange fire. In the war drums that shook the sky, a middle-aged man in the military uniform of a major general quickly passed through the busy crowd and rushed directly to the top of the mountain. It's not surprising. Qing Huaining shook his head with a solemn face, pointed to the direction of the drums and said, "Listen to the drums and you will know." "Xijing, how much time do we need?" The corner of the major general's mouth moved, and his face was a little gloomy and decadent. He was originally a very handsome man, but at this time his face was indescribably ugly. "About 3 hours." He gritted his teeth and whispered, "It will take at least 2.5 hours for us to build a perfect line of defense." 2.5 hours. Qing Huaining shook his head with a wry smile and said calmly, "There is definitely not enough time." "I know." Bai Zhijing growled, his handsome face a little ferocious. "But I know my troops. This is the fastest we can do. There's no better way." Bai Zhijing, one of the core figures of the Bai family in the giant group of Zhou State, was the commander of the 2nd Division of the Blood Battalion. The 2nd Division was a mountain combat division. Although its comprehensive strength was not the top in the Blood Battalion, its equipment configuration and daily training were most suitable for mountain combat. This place was infinitely close to the border. In front of it was a wasteland of Annan State and behind it was a primeval forest. The rolling mountains in the middle were the most suitable battlefield for Bai Zhijing and his 2nd Division. After a preliminary inspection of the terrain, Dongqing Wudi directly ordered Bai Zhijing to lead the 2nd Division to form the first line of defense in the western region here. However, compared with the 5 dark forces, Zhou State's preparation was still too inadequate. It took time to study the terrain, execute the battle plan, arrange the troops, mobilize the troops and set up the defense line. Although the efficiency of the Border Control Corps was amazing, it involved more than 100,000 troops. After doing one thing after another, it finally came to this moment. Now most of the things had been done except for the last step. Batch after batch of heavy firepower weapons were being transferred from the headquarters of the Blood Battalion, installed and erected, and finally formed an extremely powerful line of fire on the border. Once this work was done, it would be much easier to just defend, and the pressure on the entire border would be reduced. Unfortunately, they didn't have the time now. The 10,000 elites led by Dongqing Wudi were in front of them on the right. The vertical distance between the two sides was about 5 kilometers, not counting the left and right sides. At this time, the drums of the family country war shook the sky, which fully showed that Dongqing Wudi had begun to fight with the dark forces of the martial arts university. This also showed that in their direction the enemy was also on the way to charge and they were at most 5 kilometers away from here. After all, they could not charge in batches. In a time crunch, the other side would definitely press all at once. It would take the 2nd Division another 2.5 hours to build a perfect line of defense. But the enemy's rapid march of 5 kilometers, no matter how many people there were, could not take so long. At most an hour would be enough. The remaining 1.5 hours was the most difficult test for Qing Huaining and Bai Zhijing. They had only two choices. The first was to use the lives of the soldiers of the 2nd Division to buy time and set up the line of fire. However, in this way most of the troops of the 2nd Division would be transferred, and a small number of people would set up the line of fire, which was bound to take longer. As for whether it would succeed in the end, no one was sure. The second choice was to retreat now and give up this mountain. How to choose? Qing Huaining's forehead was sweating more and more, but his eyes were still calm as ever. His eyes slowly swept over the mountains and he was silent. This mountain range could be said to be the most favorable terrain in the western region. It was nearly 6 kilometers long, but both sides were peaks. The mountains were not high, but the slope was very steep, which could be said to be a natural stronghold. Only the slope where he was now had a slightly lower slope. If the enemy wanted to enter Xianxia state, this could be said to be the only way. However, this slope was only about 300 meters wide and both sides were steep mountain walls. If he guarded here, it could be said that one man could hold the pass against 10,000 enemies. Such an important terrain could be said to be a battleground. From the beginning of the founding of the People's Republic to the past few decades, Xianxia state and Annan state had been in constant conflict over this place, and countless disputes, large and small, had broken out. For the western region of Nanyun and Xianxia state, this was completely a natural gateway, and they had to defend here even if they died. We can't retreat. Qing Huaining suddenly opened his mouth. His voice was very soft, but his calm eyes flickered with the light of determination. Bai Zhijing suddenly raised his head and glared at Qing Huaining. He opened his mouth but did not know what to say. As long as we hold this place, we can buy time for several lines of defense in the rear. The enemy wants to invade from the western region. This is the only way, unless they are willing to take a detour of dozens of kilometers to step on the minefield that has existed for many years. Zhijing, we are not ready, nor are the lines of defense in the rear. In any case, we can't retreat. Qing Huaining's tone became calmer and calmer. But if we retreat and they chase after us, it will also take time. Bai Zhijing clenched his fists tightly and growled with a distorted face. Stupid. Qing Huaining's face darkened and he said coldly, "This place is easy to defend and difficult to attack. If we really abandon this place, once the enemy enters the territory and scatters, there will be endless troubles in the future. And if we retreat without fighting, this place is equivalent to directly giving it to the enemy. Once the enemy occupies this place, how can they easily hand it over? At that time, the western region of Nanyun in Xianxia state may be bounded by this place. Even if we want to fight, don't you understand how much it will cost us in this terrain? If you feel sorry for your troops now, they will all be sacrificed sooner or later in the future." Bai Zhijing closed his eyes in pain, the corners of his mouth twitched and he couldn't speak. How could he not understand the general principle? He didn't want to retreat either. Since the establishment of the Border Control Corps, there had never been a deserter, whether it was a big or a small battle. But in this situation, if he wanted to defend to the death and the line of fire had not been set up, he would be fighting with his troops. How many people in the 2nd Division would die in this battle? As long as he thought about it, Bai Zhijing's heart couldn't help but twitch. "You know what you should do." Qing Huaining took a deep look at Bai Zhijing and patted him on the shoulder with his big hand. "If we retreat from here, our rear will be exposed. Although our place here is not as important as the main battlefield on the marshal's side, it is equally important. The enemy's target is the entire Blood Battalion. If we let them break in from here, the enemy will keep coming and then the Blood Battalion will be in danger. If the Blood Battalion is really wiped out or severely damaged, even if we win in East Island, the gain will be limited. After all, there are nearly 160,000 people in the Blood Battalion. If they are gone, how can Xianxia state fill this hole? What? By relying on those pampered elites in the inland? And don't forget, even if we win the final battle of Changdao, we need to send people to guard. If the Blood Battalion is destroyed, the Snowdance Corps, which should be guarding in Changdao, is likely to be used to fill the vacancy in the Blood Battalion. In the end, what can we get? There's also Huating. When the battle breaks out here, Huating will also be in danger. We're prepared, but the other side won't be idle. Otherwise, from the beginning of the final battle of Changdao, we will regard it as the power of the whole country. In the general trend, everyone has to do their best. The international battlefield is full of smoke. No matter how much advantage you have, One wrong step often leads to the loss of the whole game. Zhijing, if we take one wrong step today, we may be the sinners of Zhongzhou state in the future. Don't you understand this? Qing Huaning's tone became harsher and harsher, and an unparalleled power burst out of him. Bai Zhijing's body trembled uncontrollably. He clenched his fists and said in a hoarse voice, I understand. You don't have to say it. The second division will go up and I will stand at the forefront and fight to the death. I will fight for time for the Blood Battalion and the western region of Nanyun with you. Qing Huaining looked ahead with a gentle and elegant smile. At the end of his sight, a vast darkness gradually appeared on the Annan plain. Dust was rising and the earth was shaking. Let me do it. An old and gentle voice suddenly rang out in the mountains. The voice was not high, gentle and quiet, but it rang clearly in everyone's ears, calm and confident. Qing Huaining and Bai Zhijing, who were staring ahead with a serious face, suddenly turned around. In their sight was the vast forest, the constant transport vehicles and the busy soldiers. But deep in the forest, there was a kind of momentum that could make all living beings tremble. It was surging and unparalleled in the world. An old star flag of Zhongzhou state appeared in everyone's sight. The flagpole, which was more than 10 meters long, was held in someone's hand. The cold wind blew in the forest, but the huge flag at the end of the flagpole was stagnant like a knife, motionless. The old man holding the star flag suddenly appeared. He walked out of the forest unhurriedly, but with every step he crossed a distance of tens of meters and quickly approached the mountain range. That kind of trembling momentum kept rising, mighty in the valley of the western region, and the fighting intent soared to the ninth heaven. The scarlet flag, which was stagnant like a knife. The shabby clothes. The old face. The fighting intent soared to the ninth heaven. At this moment the man and the flag seemed to fill the whole world. He was indomitable. Stop. The outermost patrol soldiers finally reacted. They subconsciously held up the guns in their hands and pointed at the old man. In the face of the great battle, an unidentified but ridiculously strong old man came to the battlefield alone with the star flag. This matter was weird. The patrol soldiers would never believe that the old man was one of them because of a flag in his hand. Who are you? Among the patrol soldiers, a first lieutenant held the gun in his hand tightly and looked at the old man in front of him calmly. I am. The old man held the flagpole and stood in front of the patrol team. His eyes seemed to be in a trance. I'm a veteran of Zhongzhou state. His eyes stared deeply at the mountain range ahead and he whispered, My name is Li Honghe. 19 years ago my son was sacrificed in this mountain range in front of us. It was a sacrifice. When he said these two words, the old man's tone was particularly clear with a kind of stubbornness. Li Honghe. The first lieutenant was stunned. He held the gun and muttered to himself subconsciously, It sounds a little familiar. Li Honghe smiled, grasped the flagpole in his hand and said calmly, More than 20 years ago the Border Praetorian Corps was established at my suggestion. He ignored the dull soldiers and took a step forward. His figure had appeared directly at the foot of the mountain. He finally slowed down, but his momentum was rising. Qing Huaining stared at the old man in front of him, his body trembling uncontrollably. He had never thought that he would actually see His Highness, who lived in seclusion at the border of the southern cloud, in such a scene today. He entered the invincible realm at the age of 38, killed 6 superiors of the invincible realm in his life, ranked first on the divine list for 10 years, fought hundreds of battles in his life, and never tasted defeat. He guarded Zhongzhou state, suppressed North America, dominated the African continent, looked down on the heroes of South America and suppressed an era. That was the most glorious first half of his life. His radiance was boundless and he was invincible. He was Li Honghe. He was the former god of war of Zhongzhou state. They were the veterans of Zhongzhou state today. It was the belief of everyone in this era. Qing Huaining was in a trance. Vaguely he seemed to have returned to more than 20 years ago, to the time when he had just joined the Border Praetorian Corps. At that time he was standing beside another highness, and he was personally awarded the rank of lieutenant colonel by this highness. At that time the face in front of him was not old, and every move he made was filled with vigor and domineering fierceness. At that time he personally wore the insignia on his shoulder. He said with a smile, Young men are good. Do a good job and protect the country. That was the most glorious era of the Li family. That was the era when the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family joined forces, and the whole dark world was under their feet. When that era passed, when the light of the Li family dissipated, time rumbled silently and passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, nearly 20 years had passed. The former god of war of Xianxia state was no longer there. Now what appeared in front of him was a white-haired veteran of Xianxia state. Grievance, helplessness, desolation, he fell from the peak to the dust and from the god of war to a veteran. This old man had dedicated everything to Xianxia state. No matter what he had experienced, he had been silent from beginning to end with no regrets. But the former god of war was no longer there. There was only a veteran holding a national flag. In his sight, Li Honghe was still walking slowly from the foot of the mountain to the top. But Qing Huaining did not know why his face was already full of tears. For the flag that had been worn out in 20 years of wind and frost. For the veteran in front of him. At this moment, Qing Huaining was no longer the commander of the Black Dragon Battalion, nor was he a lieutenant general of Xianxia state. In front of this veteran who risked everything for Xianxia state, he was just a veteran. A veteran who joined the Border Control Corps in the first batch and had always existed and been fighting. The mountain wind was blowing and the top of the mountain was silent. An agitated and crazed voice with a sobbing tone resounded on the peak of the mountain, as if it had exhausted all of its strength. Qing Huaining, a veteran of the Border Control Corps, pays respect to your highness. Bai Zhijing, a veteran of the Border Control Corps, pays respect to your highness. Lu Chuanhai, a veteran of the Border Control Corps, pays respect to your highness. Fu Guoqiang, a veteran of the Border Control Corps, pays respect to your highness. On the top and the bottom of the mountain, one figure after another knelt on one knee on the way Li Honghe walked. They used all their strength and roared hoarsely. It was a kind of fanatical roar close to faith. This was the oldest group of people in the 2nd Division. None of them had a military rank lower than lieutenant colonel. Everyone's military rank was higher than the current Li Honghe. But now they were just veterans. The flagpole in Li Honghe's hand shook slightly and then froze again. Get up. Li Honghe walked slowly to the top of the mountain and said softly in a gentle tone, "You're good." Everyone's faces were flushed with excitement, and they roared with all their might, "We're willing to follow your highness to kill the enemy." No need. Li Honghe didn't look back. He passed by Qing Huaining and Bai Zhijing, stood at the forefront of the top of the mountain and said softly, "Hurry up to build a line of defense. I'll block them, but my time is limited. You have to hurry up." "Your Highness." Qing Huaining's voice trembled slightly, and Bai Zhijing's expression suddenly changed. "You go and help too." Li Honghe chuckled and said in an unquestionable tone, "Hurry up. I don't have much time." Qing Huaining still wanted to say something, but Bai Zhijing beside him had already tugged at his sleeve and shook his head slightly. Li Honghe didn't look back and walked slowly down the hill alone. Dust rose from the wasteland in front of them. A large black mass of people rushed forward at full speed, like a black tide, surging forward majestically. The enemy had no flag and didn't wear military uniforms. Li Honghe couldn't tell who they were and he didn't bother to identify them. No dark force could mobilize so many people on the border of Xianxia state. Most of them, no matter what their current identity was, were just a disguise. They had only one real identity. Li Honghe smiled and thrust the flagpole in his hand into the ground. The scarlet flag, which was more than 10 meters long, suddenly flew in the wind. At this moment the mountain range behind Li Honghe and everything of the 2nd Division seemed to have completely disappeared. In everyone's sight, there was only the man and the flag that could almost hold up the sky. The wind instantly became piercingly cold. Li Honghe stood quietly under the flag. Behind him was the entrance of the mountain range, which was less than 300 meters away. He stood in the middle and his seemingly weak body seemed to block the entire Xianxia state. The black tide ahead was getting closer and closer. Li Honghe's expression grew gentler. He was born in the best era. From childhood to old age in this life he carried not only the glory of the Li family, but also the pride of the Li family. The god of war of Xianxia state fought for the country. The obsession of the Li family was concentrated on him and maybe it would disappear from him. Li Guangtu was an ambitious man of his generation. He might be willing to sacrifice everything for the Li family, but his character was destined not to be a soldier who would do anything to defend his family and country. He had ambition and desire. When he established the Border Control Corps, Li Honghe hoped that he could find his mission and responsibility in this pure atmosphere of iron and blood. But in the end he didn't really commit treason, but he died. Li Tianlan's future was still uncertain. And his childhood experience also doomed him to be as loyal and stubborn as Li Honghe to guard the country. In the end it seemed that Li Honghe was the purest of the three generations. Whether he was the god of war or a veteran, what he did was to protect the country. He had a clear conscience. Impartial, never annoyed. I've been indecisive all my life. If I can die here in battle, it's my end. In the wind, Li Honghe whispered to himself, and his wise eyes were full of freedom. The black tide in front of them surged forward in a frenzy, as if it could topple mountains and overturn seas. It was unstoppable. Li Honghe's slightly stooped body suddenly straightened up and reached out to grab the flying flag. It swept across. The flag streaked across the cold wind and exploded in the wilderness like a thunderclap. The world trembled. A sword energy nearly 100 feet long rose to the sky in an instant. The boundless sword light rushed into the black tide formed by the crowd in front of them with an incomparably heroic momentum. The sky was about to collapse under the sword light. The vast sword light tore the sky apart, bringing with it a large amount of blood rain that rained down unscrupulously. The endless black tide rushed forward, stepping on the bodies of their companions, and the sound of killing shook the sky. Li Honghe waved the star flag in his hand wildly. One after another, the sword light as long as 100 feet rushed into the crowd, bursting out blood all over the sky. The wilderness was stained with blood. The flag was stained with blood. The sword light surged like a waterfall. The flag danced like a dragon. Fight to the death. Chapter 227. The light at the edge of the sky slowly closed in the sultry temperature. The long night was coming, and the sky at the end of the sight was oppressive black. In the alternating time of day and night, there was no dim setting sun in the distant sky of Huating, only gloomy dark clouds. The dark clouds were getting lower and lower. Standing on the high ground of the Sky Academy and looking up, the dark clouds all over the sky seemed to be within reach. If you stared deeply, you could even vaguely see the blue lightning brewing inside the dark clouds. In the classroom on the top floor of the number 3 teaching building of the Sky Academy, Zhuang Huayang looked through the window at the lower and lower dark clouds above. With a complicated expression, he sighed softly with some worry. It's going to rain tonight. It's normal for the weather to change. Headmaster Zhuang is also a person who has experienced storms, and we have prepared umbrellas. Why should you worry? Yi Dongxing, who was known as the god of army in Zhongzhou State, slowly came to Zhuang Huayang and said with a kind smile. The god of army of Zhongzhou State, who was born in the southeast group but was now highly relied on by all parties, looked a little ordinary. But at this time, dressed in a military uniform, his every move carried an indescribable spirit. It was not the arrogance and fierceness of a warrior, but the deep and elegant wisdom and calmness. It was simple, but it gave people a feeling that everything was under control. I'm getting old, and the older I get, the more timid I become. Zhuang Huayang laughed at himself, turned to look at Yi Dongxing and said with a smile, I'm not as confident as Marshal Yi. It's windy and rainy tonight, and our umbrellas are still a little small. I'm afraid that they will break. Yi Dongxing smiled and squinted at the figure standing in front of another window. He said with a smile, Old Gu, did you hear that? The headmaster thinks your umbrella is not big enough. If you can't protect the Sky Academy tonight, the headmaster will get angry. Don't blame me for not reminding you. There's no other way. Gu Xingyun, who was also looking out of the window with a solemn face, said lightly, All the elites of Kunlun City have come out. Tonight we will do our best and die without regret. If someone didn't want to preserve his strength, what's the big deal even if the wind and rain were 10 times stronger tonight? Yi Dongxing's expression did not change, and he said softly, Your Highness, you're too serious. Now everyone is going all out. How can there be any preservation of strength? Gu Xingyun's elegant and almost gentle face showed a sneer. He did not look back but asked sharply, Go all out? The Wang family of Beihai? The smile on Yi Dongxing's face gradually became faint, and even his tone became rigid, like an official statement without substance. His Majesty Sword Emperor has gone to the southwest border with the human emperor. With only one person and one spear, the Wang family of Beihai's contribution is no less than that of Kunlun City. Besides, Beihai province was vast and close to East Island. How could His Majesty show any flaws? The few elites were naturally left to guard the North Sea province. This was the tacit agreement of all the higher-ups. What could His Highness's sarcasm change? Are you afraid? Scared. Gu Xingyun suddenly turned his head and looked at Yi Dongxing. His tone was very soft, but his eyes were extremely cold. We've gone off topic. Zhuang Huayang stood aside with a smile and pointed out of the window. A strange light flashed in his deep eyes and he sighed softly, "The storm is coming." A muffled thunder suddenly rolled across the sky. The pale blue lightning tore through the night. The glass trembled in the thunder, and heavy rain swept across Huating without warning. Gu Xingyun and Yi Dongxing did not say anything more. They turned around at the same time and looked at a screen in the room with a serious look. They were now in the largest classroom in the number 3 teaching building, with an area of nearly 2,000 square meters. One of the 100-meter wide walls was made into a super large screen. At this time the screen was lit up and the scene looked extremely shocking. There were hundreds of computers arranged vertically in the classroom. As the rain fell, there were at least 2 military elites working busily in front of each computer. The clattering of the keyboard and the sound of the rain merged together, and the images on the big screen were constantly changing as the military elites worked busily. Gu Xingyun, Yi Dongxing, and Zhuang Huayang all stared at the screen intently. However, the big screen had been divided into countless windows at this time, and the pictures on each window were turning like running water. Even if the 3 had amazing eyesight, their eyes still instinctively felt uncomfortable after watching for a while. On the whole big screen, the real-time pictures of every corner of Huating were jumping. Every street, every intersection, and every highway were changing constantly. The speed was so fast that it was dazzling. The big classroom was quiet for a while. The 3 stared at the screen in front of them tightly for fear of missing any detail. The 5th day and night. This was the key of the key. At this time, Huating, from the urban area to the Sky Academy, had become one of the most heavily guarded places in the whole Zhengzhou state. The Sky Academy in particular was a combustible and explosive powder keg. The experts of the 5 forces who had come to the Sky Academy to watch the ceremony were all trapped here. Tianhai Wuji, the palace master of Wuji Palace. Luxing Zhangquan, the master of Jifeng Sword Raining School. Jiang Chenyan, the second in command of the Jiang family of South America. Chaos, the commander of Knights Templars. Huan Kong, the master of Fantasy World. There were 5 experts of the Invincible Realm, not to mention the experts of the Thundershocking Realm they brought. The Sky Academy had not been idle during this time. These people had special identities and were extremely honorable. Naturally, they could not be killed. Not to mention whether it would lose the demeanor of a superpower. Even if Zhengzhou State did not care about it, it would be difficult for it to bear the consequences of killing them. They came to Zhengzhou State just to watch the ceremony. If they really died in Huating, perhaps the special warfare system of Zhengzhou State would be unable to move within their sphere of influence in the future. After all the dark forces had intricate inside stories behind them. It was not kind to trap them. If they were really killed when they came to watch the ceremony, Zhengzhou State would have made countless enemies at once. However, although they could not be killed, Zhuang Huayang did not make them feel better. He invited Yu Donglai, one of the former sacred guards of the Li family, to the Sky Academy, and almost every day he tampered with their meals. Yu Donglai was known as the Poison Doctor and was famous throughout the Dark World. When it came to using poison, he was definitely regarded as a guru. However, it was really difficult to poison 5 experts of the Invincible Realm and dozens of experts of the Thundershocking Realm without being noticed. Even Yu Donglai tried his best to prepare the poison and carefully controlled the dosage. The poison concocted by Yu Donglai did little harm to the body and would only reduce their physical strength. But the most important toxicity was to erode the spirit. The spirit determined the will, and the will was as important as the strength in martial arts. If the will was not focused enough, the strength could not be exerted, and the combat capability was destined to be greatly reduced. This kind of poison was the most difficult to be noticed, but the shortcoming was that it took effect slowly. For many days, those prisoners with special identities had been eating this kind of poison every meal, but the effect was not great. The combat capability of the 5 experts of the Invincible Realm and those experts of the Thundershocking Realm might decline, but not by much. At least the 5 experts of the Invincible Realm, even if they were not at their peak, their combat capability was definitely above the half-step Invincible Realm. This was already the maximum toxicity that the poison concocted by Yu Donglai could exert. Now Wang Tianzong had gone to the border of Zhongzhou state, and the master of Samsara Palace was said to have left the Sky Academy to heal her wounds in secret. Gu Xingyun was the only expert of the invincible realm in the entire Sky Academy. In the case that the defense of the Sky Academy was empty, even if the 5 experts of the invincible realm were not at their peak, they were still 5 horrible monsters for Zhongzhou state. If they took advantage of the chaos to break out, it would be a disaster for the entire Huading. They might not know the situation inside the Sky Academy, but at this time Huading was also turbulent with undercurrents. After all, as Tianhai Wuji and Luxing Songchuan entered Zhongzhou state, a considerable part of the special warfare elites of East Island also lurked in Huating. During this time, Kunlun City issued a search warrant, and the entire special warfare system searched in Huating. Although many people were found, some escaped fish were still hiding in the dark. They were all in Huating facing an excellent opportunity. If the two sides wanted to get in touch, even in the Sky Academy, they could still find a way. Now it was the 5th day and night of the 7-day period. The 5 dark forces seemed to have secretly reached a tacit understanding with East Island. During this delicate period, the 5 forces joined forces with Annan State to invade the border of Zhongzhou State. As soon as Wang Tianzong left, the Sky Academy and Huading suddenly lost a big deterrent force. If the hostile forces trapped in Huading and the Sky Academy could really break out tonight, they could still reach Changdao at this time. At that time, the final battle of Changdao might be at the last moment, and these experts who broke out were enough to change the result of the final battle of Changdao. Zhongzhou State was aware of the changes at the border, but it never thought that the changes at the border were actually caused by the 5 dark forces. This had never happened in the past decades, and the 5 forces could let go of their grievances and come together, which was enough to show their great determination and ambition. In the battle of the border, even figures of the invincible realm on the divine list would appear. Wang Tianzong, who was originally in charge of Huating, could only rush to the southwest border to save the situation. As soon as he moved, Huating suddenly became empty. For a few days, the elites of Azura Path, Great Soaring Temple, Shadow Sect, Kunlun City, and other institutions could only rush to Huating to replenish the strength of Huating. And this group of people in the plan was originally the 3rd group of elites who rushed to East Island. Now they were used to defend Huating, and East Island suddenly became a little weak. After all, this situation was too big and there were too many variables. It could be said that one move in one part could affect the whole situation. Zhongzhou State, which had a very obvious advantage in the first move, suddenly became weak as the 5 forces invaded the border. The original advantage was not only wiped out, but if they couldn't defend Huating tonight when this group of hostile experts arrived at East Island, the whole situation would be completely reversed and become precarious. Once the worst happened, not to mention East Island, Zhongzhou State was bound to suffer a great loss of vitality. Not to mention expanding outward, even defending the homeland would be a problem. At that time, the superpowers would take the opportunity to invade Zhongzhou State, and maybe the Battle of Changdao would happen again in Zhongzhou State. If things were really like this, then as the main promoter of the plot of East Island, Gu Xingyun would definitely be blamed, and the good situation would also be in vain. This might be the result that some people wanted to see, right? Staring at the screen in front of him, Gu Xingyun looked calm and elegant, but his eyes were full of coldness. This situation was not irreversible, but there was not much he could do. The Wang family of Beihai had become the key to breaking the situation. As the behind-the-scenes boss of the southeast group of Zhongzhou State, the Wang family of Beihai, which had the vague power of a country in Zhongzhou State, had been glorious for more than 500 years. Its deep foundation was enough to make everyone's scalp numb. Wang Tianzong went to the southwest border with the human emperor in his hand. Firmament, the enchantress, Black Pupil and Wang Xingxiao entered East Island. The Wang family of Beihai had invested a lot, but this was far from all their strength. If the strength of the Wang family of Beihai could be invested in a large number, how could Zhongzhou State be so embarrassed? In recent days, more than one high-level official of Zhongzhou State asked Wang Tianzong to invest more combat power in Zhongzhou State, but the Wang family of Beihai was very firm. They clearly said that they would reserve their strength to guard Beihai province in a sensitive situation, and they did invest a lot. Even if everyone knew that the Wang family of Beihai was saving their strength, they had nothing to say. Every man for himself, and heaven and earth would destroy him. The general trend was turbulent and the situation was changing. Who could be selfless? Even Gu Xingyun himself, as the war god of Zhongzhou state, thought that he could not do it wholeheartedly for Zhongzhou state. How could he ask Beihai province, which had a very delicate relationship with Zhongzhou state? Perhaps the Li family was the only one who could do this, right? Unfortunately, Kunlun City and the Li family were destined not to coexist in Zhongzhou state. A glaring blue lightning flashed on the big screen that was rotating rapidly. The lightning rushed up to the sky and exploded the surging river. Gu Xingyun's pupils shrank suddenly and he subconsciously shouted in a low voice, "Window 27, replay." There was no need to replay it at all. A deep and crazy voice directly resounded through the night sky of the Sky Academy through the heavy rain. "Gu Xingyun, come out and fight." The loud voice shook the night sky, and the scene played back by Window 27 was the gate of the Sky Academy. A figure stood in the air above the river, and there was glaring lightning all over his body. He was not asking for a fight. It was an obvious signal. At the same time, on the continuously rolling screen, countless windows were in chaos almost at the same time. Many streets in Huading were attacked by unknown masters at the same time. Lightning and fire bloomed at every intersection. With violent explosions, cars and pedestrians were all crowded together, and the traffic of the whole city suddenly became chaotic. East Island elites hiding in downtown Huading began to break out in the rainy night. Zhuang Huayang quietly looked at the screen in front of him and said blandly, "The rain is heavy. In one night, I don't know how many small fish and shrimps can swim back to Changdao with this rain. When they get back to Changdao they will really become big fish." At this moment, maybe only Zhongzhou State's god of army Yi Dongsheng could laugh. He chuckled and shook his head, saying slowly, "Headmaster, Huading is not far from Changdao, only separated by a sea area. It should be raining in Changdao now. The rain in Huading can't drown them, but not necessarily in Changdao." Zhuang Huayang was stunned for a moment. Gu Xingyun had already turned around. He stared at Yi Dongsheng's bland face for a long time and then said coldly, "You have a good plan." Yi Dongsheng smiled blandly and didn't say much. But Gu Xingyun could already be sure that in such an ever-changing situation, the Wang family of Beihai suppressed its main force and didn't support Huading or the border. They weren't guarding Beihai province at all. This was a big gamble. The main force of the Wang family of Beihai might have already secretly entered Changdao. In a dangerous situation, he went deep into the enemy's rear with such courage. He could be called an ambitious man of his generation. If the Wang family of Beihai won the final battle in Changdao, even if Huading suffered heavy losses, even if the border failed, it was still a victory for Zhongzhou state. A Pyrrhic victory was also a victory. But Gu Xingyun had to bear the consequences of Huading's failure alone. What a good plan. The killing intent flashed in Gu Xingyun's eyes. In this battle, the 5 invincible realm experts weren't in their peak state. And he was seriously injured on the spot after the battle with the governor of Samsara. Although he consumed a bottle of precious potion that could be regarded as the foundation in Kunlun City and recovered more than half of his strength, he was still not in his peak state. This night, under this night rain, he was destined to be extremely difficult. "Gu Xingyun, come out and fight." In front of the Sky Academy, the seemingly reckless challenge rang out again, and the sound was like thunder. Boom. Before Gu Xingyun moved, a 6-story residential building in the residential area of the Sky Academy had been instantly shattered by a huge force. The 5 invincible realm experts trapped in the Sky Academy slowly moved forward in the ruins. Chapter 228. A bloody battle. For every soldier of the Thunderbolt Battalion, when their Marshal Dongqing Wudi personally beat the war drum of the family and country, there was no way out of this war. Advance. Or die. The sound of killing at the border of Nanyun shook the sky. From dawn to dusk, blood was spilled over every inch of land on the border. Decisive roars and gunshots roared wantonly, bullets flew and light beams shuttled back and forth. Large crowds crowded together, trying to kill the enemy by any means necessary. The thick ice wall was broken in the moment it was condensed. Fire and lightning intertwined, rising and burning but quickly extinguished. Corpses fell to the ground in disorder. The pungent smell of blood was everywhere inside and outside the forest. The blood evaporated and dried up in the fire. The bloody battle lasted for more than 10 hours. When the sun was about to set, the whole sky became a strange blood-red color. Under the blood-red sky, large patches of light and shadow were still intertwining and flashing. The sound of the war drum of the family and country never stopped, but became louder and louder. More and more people fell in pools of blood and were trampled into meat paste before they could even struggle. The people on both sides collided with each other in the rain of bullets with red eyes. The war seemed to never stop. From a distance, in the flashing light and shadow, the vast battlefield was like a Shura purgatory with a gorgeous coat. Under the gorgeous light and shadow, in addition to the blood and corpses, there was only madness and resentment. Night gradually fell on the border. The hoarse roars of thousands of people continued. The morale of the Border Control Corps soared, and they kept charging forward with reckless momentum. It was a madness that was enough to make anyone's scalp numb. They were so aggressive and radical that they ignored life and death. Boom, boom, boom. A strong roar sounded in the depths of the forest in the distance. More than a dozen brilliant streams of light cut through the dark night in an instant. The cannonballs dragged a fiery red tail flame over the crowd of the Border Control Corps and landed in the rear of the enemy. In the angry roar, ice walls appeared one after another in the blink of an eye behind the enemy. The airflow in front of the ice walls was compressed to the extreme. At the same time, at least 10 Thundershocking Realm experts took action at the same time to stop the shells falling from the sky. The cannonballs that were fired at the same time struck the ice wall with a ferocious light of death. The earth-shattering sound covered the entire battlefield, and the tall and thick ice wall was completely torn apart. Huge chunks of ice flew everywhere, and the densely packed crowd instantly exploded into waves of blood. Broken limbs flew into the sky along with the flames, and suddenly a large, dazzling blank space appeared behind the enemy. There were some uncontrolled disturbances at the forefront of the enemy. How could the soldiers of the Border Control Corps let go of this hard-won opportunity? They roared and charged forward, and the 1,000-meter-long battlefront was forced back several hundred meters. Boom, boom. In the rear of the Border Control Corps, crazy artillery fire began to pour unscrupulously. Although the enemy occasionally fought back, their firepower was much worse than that of the Border Control Corps. The battle line, which was like a meat grinder, was forced to keep retreating. In the war that lasted more than 10 hours, the front line kept retreating and was about to withdraw from the territory of Xianxia State. Less than 300 meters behind them was the territory of Annan State. Cannonballs roared down from the sky one after another, and patches of the enemy were swallowed up by the strong explosions. There were more and more blank spaces in the rear of the enemy. In the headquarters at the rear of the enemy, a short commander's face became more and more unsightly. When the armed helicopters of the Border Control Corps slowly took off, the commander, who had been brewing his anger for a long time, could no longer hold it in and completely exploded. His short body jumped up from the ground and he shouted in English without any grace, "Bastards, all of you are bastards. When are you going to take action? Are you going to wait for all my people to die? My people have been fighting for more than 10 hours, and all the weapons and ammunition are running out. If you still don't take action, I will ask my people to withdraw." The commander's skin was dark and he was short, but his roar was full of energy, making everyone's ears buzz. He was not in a room but on the top of a mountain behind the enemy. Within a radius of several kilometers, this could be said to be the highest place. Standing on the top of the mountain and looking down with the help of binoculars, they could roughly see the situation of the battlefield even through the dense forest. Don't get excited, Mr. Yuan. You must know that this is a great war. Our losses may be heavy, but the results are equally brilliant. Because in this war we can not only destroy the Blood Battalion, but also half of the Thunderbolt Battalion. You know what this means. In front of the commander, a middle-aged white man in his 50s smiled and said softly, "This is not your loss, this is my loss. All of it is mine." The short commander said coldly, "You have lost a lot, but you have also destroyed enough enemies." A white woman glanced at the commander and said coldly, "There were not many people on the top of the mountain. To be exact, there were only 6 people. The Polar Ground Alliance, the Heroes Club, Knights Templars, the Jiang family of South America and Fantasy World. Each of the 5 superpowers had 1 person, but at this time they were united. The 6th person was the short commander. 5 against 1. The commander did not have the advantage in terms of number or strength. But in the thick night he was not afraid at all. He just sneered and said, "So what? Even if we destroy the entire border control corps, what can we get? Sorry. A soft voice sounded. Among the 5 superpowers, the man representing the Jiang family of South America laughed softly and said, Mr. Wan, you can't get anything because you and your troops are rebels. The commander's momentum suddenly stagnated, and then his whole body suddenly burst out with a fierce killing intent. In front of him, the representatives of the 5 superpowers almost took a step at the same time, intentionally or unintentionally, and stood together, looking at the commander in front of them coldly. Even if the rebels can't get anything, they shouldn't come to die. The commander looked at the 5 experts in front of him and said in a cold tone, My troops have suffered heavy casualties and run out of ammunition. Now I think it's time for you to take action. You have the right to refuse, but I also have the right to withdraw from this war. Everyone, I give you 5 minutes. You know what to do. I don't think it's time yet. The white man who spoke first shook his head and said, This is not in line with our plan, Mr. Wan. You must cooperate with us or I will report your behavior to your president. As you wish. The commander interrupted him with a sneer and said indifferently, We are rebels. Do we need to care about other things? He took out the walkie-talkie in his hand and looked provocatively at the 5 experts in front of him. He said mockingly, You only have 3 minutes to think about it. I'll give you 2 choices. First, let your people press forward and fight with my troops. Second, kill me now if you think you can take over my command. We're all friends. There's no need to go this far, is there? The middle-aged man from the Jiang family of South America said with a smile. He picked up the binoculars and looked seriously at the battlefield below. After a long time he said softly, Everyone, it's almost time. Mr. Wan is right. It's time for us to take action. Why don't we send our little butterflies to play with them first? The other 4 people were slightly stunned. They were silent. Boom. A huge sound wave rang out from the back of the battlefield. Behind the border control corps there was a sudden burst of fire. Countless cannonballs rose in the air with trailing flames, like meteors, rushing into the enemy's rear one after another. The sky was illuminated by the fire. In the fierce explosion the entire border was shaking wildly. It was like the end of the world.